Today I give you, drumroll please, almost 3 whole hours of the darkest and most unhinged theories from every movie and show I've covered across my channel. So grab your snacks, sit back, or don't, and enjoy these theories. Be sure to let me know which one ends up being your favorite, so let's get right into these theories. What if Coraline got a sequel? If we were finally getting our hands on an addition to one of the best movies ever made, what would the story even be about? Because with all the mysteries and theories surrounding our beloved film, we may just be able to form an idea that makes a sequel, or even a prequel, make sense. And shout out to one of my viewers who helped spark this chain reaction. So before we go exploring what ifs, hit that subscribe button, as what if the what ifs became true. See, I know I'm not the only one who has always wanted a second film to Coraline because of how good it truly is. I mean, this movie isn't even just a regular kids movie. When I was younger, my mom used to say she'd get the other mother if I misbehave, and boy, did that scare the crap out of me. And after watching and even reading Coraline, I don't think Coraline's story is entirely finished. But before I really dive deep into our clues, I want to first talk about the plot differences between the film released in 2009 and the book that came before it. See, I spent the last few days reading it, and the way my brain visualized it was if we took our colorful film Coraline and drained it of all its color. See, the book is partly the same and of course follows Coraline, but it definitely has a much darker tone. There is no doll, and there is no Wybie. In the book, Coraline moves into the house. Noted that it was so big they only owned part of it, just like in our film. She still has her neighbors Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, both being performers before retiring, and they mention that they warned Coraline on the first day of how dangerous the well was. And we have our upstairs neighbor, Mr. Bobo, who is training mice to do performances. Coraline ends up spending a couple days in this house before even experiencing the other world, and only explored the house the day it rained. Her father told her to count things around the house, and in the drawing room she spots a door. Her mom then finds a key that being described as the biggest, blackest, and rustiest key. Coraline and her mom then open the door and are met with a ton of bricks, where her mother explains before this house was turned into flats, this door led to the flat on the other side that was still vacant. Coraline then goes to bed, and she dreamed of black shapes that slid from place to place to avoid the light. They have little red eyes and sharp yellow teeth. They also sang a song that goes like this: "We are small, but we are many. We are many, we are small. We were here before you rose. We will be here when you fall." Another 2 days pass, and we fall on the day Coraline visits the other world. It happened to be the time where her mom went to go get groceries after they shopped for her school clothes, where Coraline got the key down from where her mother put it and opened the door. And instead of a bright spider webby tunnel like we see in the film, she is greeted to a dark hallway. She then goes through and she realizes that this place was just like her home, with very subtle differences. Like the boy in old-fashioned clothing staring at some bubbles, and her home was now a little bit different and more sinister as his expression has now changed. Coraline was then called out to what sounded like her mother, and as she followed the voice, she was met with her other mother, whose skin was described as white as paper. And in the book, I'd like to say this Coraline is a lot braver than the one we see in the movie, as she asks without hesitation, "Who are you?" Which was replied with, "I am your other mother," the classic line we all love. Coraline then fetches her other father and they proceed to eat. Afterward, Coraline goes to her room and then is surprised by the circus of rats who sing the song, "We have teeth and we have tails, we have tails, we have eyes. We were here before you fell. You will be here when we rise." And Coraline was sure she heard this, as looking back she heard a song quite similar earlier. Coraline then goes outside, and one thing I found quite interesting is that the other world actually had daylight, as it's described as a sunny cold day, unlike when we see it in the film as it's always nighttime. And here is where Coraline encounters the cat, which she says, "You must be the other cat," and he replies, "No, I'm not the other anything, I'm me," and his green eyes glinted. And Coraline asked how he could talk, where he shrugged even though he has no shoulders. The cat then, in movie-like fashion, disappears behind a tree, and Coraline can't find him. She then goes to the other Miss Spink and Miss Forcible's place, where she ends up in a dimly lit theater where a dog greets her and is also able to talk. The dog then leads her to a seat and the play begins. Their act also being very different from our film, as Miss Spink rides a one-wheel bicycle and is juggling, and Miss Forcible follows behind her as she spreads flower petals on the ground. And then when they reach the middle of the stage, they both unbutton themselves, revealing much younger versions where they ask for a volunteer, and Coraline joins them on stage. They then tie a balloon to her head, and then Miss Forcible was blindfolded by Miss Spink and given a knife. Miss Forcible then proceeds to launch the knife toward Coraline and pop the balloon. And in return, all Coraline got was a box of chocolates, which she shared to the dog next to her. Coraline then leaves the show, and her other parents are waiting for her in the garden. And they walk back to the house together and they tell her she can stay, but she has to do one thing. And on a china plate is a spool of black cotton, a long silver needle, and 2 large black buttons. I don't think so, Coraline tells them, and Coraline says she is going now. And then Coraline heads back home through that very same hallway she did once before, where it is now suggested that something is there, something that is very old and very slow. Coraline, then at home, comes to realize that her parents are missing, and the cat wakes her up after she went and laid in her parents' bed, leading Coraline to the mirror where her mom wrote, "Help us." Coraline then proceeds to call the police. She then explains everything that happens, but they don't believe her, so they weren't much of any help. Coraline then gears up and heads back through the door with the cat, with a candlestick and an apple in each pocket. She then tells the cat a story about her and her dad and how they used to explore, and how one time she was told to run up the hill and she felt a pain on her arm. And when she got away, she turned around and she saw a bunch of yellow wasps, and her dad was stung 39 times. And it turns out he dropped his glasses, so he had to go back to get them. And she explains how him being stung for her wasn't brave, but going back for his glasses now knowing the danger was indeed brave. Closer to the end of the tunnel, Coraline is then tricked by the other mother, just like in our film, calling out to her very eerily close to her mother's voice. Coraline then asked where her parents were and didn't receive an answer, but in another attempt to trick Coraline again, the other mother brushed the mirror and it showed her parents coming home with suitcases saying how they had such a great vacation without Coraline, which Coraline refuses to believe. The other mother then makes Coraline follow her back to the drawing room, where the other mother takes the key and explains that there is only one, and she heads to bed. Coraline then goes outside where she finds the cat again, and he explains he doesn't have a name, and that the only way to get her parents is to challenge her and to play a game. And he suggests that she goes to bed also to get some rest for tomorrow, which she eventually does. The next day, Coraline isn't sure where she is at first, but quickly remembers and heads out to look for the other mother, but cannot find her. She then finds the other father, which now looks less like a real father and more like a bread dough rising, where he says she is fixing the doors to keep away the cat. She then heads back to the drawing room and examines it, as there is now subtle details that change from even the first time she was here. There is then a snow globe that catches her attention on the mantle that isn't there in the real world. She then looks and there's 2 people inside of it and she gives it a shake. She ultimately puts down and heads away. Coraline is then outside and she starts to circle the world, where the cat ultimately joins her, and they have a similar conversation to the one in the film as they wrap around the world and end up back at the house. Coraline then enters the house again and the other mother finds her, not even being reflected in the mirror, being told mirrors aren't to be trusted. She then leads Coraline to the lounge where they have an almost one-to-one conversation that we see in the movie, where the other mother eats bugs and becomes more thin, more tall, and even more frightening. Then Coraline is thrown behind the mirror, and in the book, this mirror is actually under lock and key, and it's a small closet not even big enough to lay in, compared to the one we actually see in the film that is seemingly magic and is quite large. Coraline, in this tiny closet, then feels around the wall with her hands to get a sense of everything, as she can't really see, where her hand then catches what feels like a face, and a faint voice whispers shush for the beldam could be listening. They go on to explain that they were past victims of the beldam and how they need her help to be freed, and Coraline then gets some rest. The beldam comes to get her and Coraline proposes the game over breakfast, to which the beldam agrees. So Coraline is off to look for the 3 ghost children's souls and her parents. She then finds the first one in her room with all the toys, where one of the ghost children, the boy, tell her to hurry, and she goes on to look for the next one, which is with Miss Spink and Miss Forcible. After gaining the second one, she gets a visit from the beldam, who gives her a key to the empty flat, where Coraline finds a cellar and goes down it nervously, where her other father, now looking puffy and no longer like her father at all, is there, and he says he's sorry and proceeds to try to get Coraline. Then Coraline rips off his other eye and gets back up out of the cellar before he can catch her. She then heads up to Mr. Bobo's and searches around until she finds the last one, being taken away by a rat, where she follows too fast and falls down, scraping her knee and her hands, and they're bleeding. But the cat comes to the rescue and catches the rat, and she gets the last soul. She then, with the cat, heads inside, the cat trembling with fear as the mother closes all the doors so he can't just escape like he used to, and they are greeted from the other mother. Coraline, just like in the movie, tricks the beldam to open the door. She throws the cat, grabs the globe and the key, and escapes. And unlike the movie, the beldam doesn't turn it into a web, and with the help of the children and even her parents, she is able to close the door, but the beldam's hand is severed off, but it lays there. As the cat and Coraline hurry through the corridor, Coraline running her hand on the wall, and it now felt warm and also covered in fur, and it moved as if it was breathing. And then something went between Coraline's feet, almost making her fall, but she kept going and ultimately made it out. Coraline's parents are now free along with the ghost children, and she actually sees the ghost children in a dream where one child in particular has wings and silver in her hair, and the two walk away as that one flies. They also warn Coraline that it isn't the end, and Coraline realizes she has to throw out the key, so she sets up a trap, luring the hand to the well, and the hand jumps on a cloth where the key was placed, sending both the hand and the key down for a while until Coraline heard it thump and splash at the bottom. See, now that everyone who may not read the book understands that there are some differences, we can get into why a sequel or even a prequel would work from both the film and the book independently. See, if we start by looking at the film, I want to address the many things like the addition of Wybie and the doll, and how the well is differing to the book, and also the changes to the ghost children. See, a lot of theories, including my own, were mainly built from the film independently from its source material. So in my case, I've done the coma theory, the doll theory, and even the dream theory, all of which including details that were never in the book. So starting with Wybie, him being added onto our film gave it another area of depth to explore, because not only does he help Coraline and give us some history of the Pink Palace, but we also now get his grandma within the story. See, within the later half of the film, closer to the end when we meet the ghost children, 3 of them all being from very different times, one of these ghost children just so happened to be Mrs. Lovat's twin sister, who while she was young was lured away from their family and taken from them by the beldam. And with this information, there's already a clear starting point to explore for a prequel, one showing the events of what happened to each of these ghost children, what tactics and tricks did our beldam use and take to lure them in, and what was truly going on in these children's day-to-day lives that made the beldam's world seem like a dream. Because in Coraline's case, in the film, she felt neglected and unheard by her parents, and the beldam used that to take advantage, giving her fun and enjoyment, almost trapping Coraline there forever. Well, maybe. And it would be cool to explore the other ghost children's lives as maybe even a darker version and even more cruel event, as we'd see the beldam succeed unlike she did. See how she devours the children and why she traps them there. And the build up to Coraline would shine a new, more unsettling light. Another cool prequel that is entirely possible would be about the beldam herself. See, neither in the book or even in the film does it ever explain how she got there, why she is what she is, and why it's only children that she targets, and how she even possesses her powers. Another thing I find odd about the beldam herself is the fact that in the book and in the film, she's able to capture and steal Coraline's parents, putting them into a snow globe against their will, yet doesn't do the same with Coraline and presumably the other children. And the only thing my mind can think of in particular is that she can trap anyone residing in the Pink Palace within an object, but can't devour them. Although within the book, when Coraline is behind the mirror and when the beldam comes to free her, she appears more healthy. Even though nothing is stated about her parents being different or looking older, it may be possible she had a little bit of their life force, but that's all speculation. Another theory people like to talk about is the fact that Coraline may have never escaped, using the reasons like the cat at the end of the movie traveling behind the sign disappearing, and how her mother's nose went from crooked to straight as well. And even some theories say that the well Coraline finds at the beginning of the film is a tunnel to the other world, thanks to the explanation from YB saying how if you fell, you'd go so deep you'd see stars. So Coraline accidentally gave the beldam back her key, freeing her from being locked away, which the sequel would continue where it left off, preying on Coraline once more, or even, depending on how long in the future another resident confining within the Pink Palace with, another child. So looking at the film, these options are very apparent and not too far-fetched to believe. And now, taking a look at the book itself, I want to circle back to the ghost children idea, because one of these ghost children in the book appeared to have wings and silvery shine within her hair, with spider webby clothes, suggesting that they were actually a fairy, because in the version of the book that I read, it actually had a Q&A tied to it, and Neil Gaiman, the author of the book, said that the only fairy in the book has been dead for hundreds of years, and some people who read the book didn't even notice her at all, tying her to fairy folklore. And if we think about the beldam and how she was able to catch the fairy, then that suggests that the beldam is way older than what we really think she is. So having a story about the fairies and maybe even other magical beings could even make the Pink Palace itself an interesting thing, because even when we think about the corridor Coraline goes through in the book, the one thing that it implies is that it's alive. The house itself also holds secrets other than the beldam, like the mice who sing and talk. So we could have a story about the true beginning of the beldam and the Pink Palace, because not once does it say the beldam is old, even though the word beldam, meaning hag and a witch, and was used for grandmother back then, but the corridor Coraline goes through is, meaning this house is predating the beldam and even possibly fairies themselves. So the real question is just how old this house is, and who even built it, why it was built, and how did the beldam come to find it and tie herself toward it. All of which that could be explained with a possible prequel. On top of that, Coraline's neighbors Miss Spink, Miss Forcible, and Mr. Bobinski, or Mr. Bobo, could also have some explanation, as they all give Coraline warnings through tea leaves and even through talking with the mice. So it's very possible that they have some ties with how the Pink Palace works. But these are all things that I'd like to see in a potential prequel. Overall, there are several ideas that stem from the same evidence that was presented to us, and if I had to pick one I'd really like to see, I think it would have to go to the ghost children's origin, as seeing a more tragic and more darker themed version of our film, where we know the ending, would be a cool concept, and I believe a beautiful tragedy. But to that I ask, what would you like to see if Coraline got a perfect sequel, or even a prequel? Have you ever noticed throughout the entire Coraline movie, her mother is wearing a neck brace? After rewatching the film, it stood out to me, and shout out to one of my commenters on the last theory that helped spark this whole idea. Because what if Coraline isn't just in a dream? What if she's actually in a coma? What if everything we see in the movie, the doll, the other world, the Pink Palace, and even her neighbors are all made up in her mind as she's trying to survive in some sort of twisted nightmare, after the accident her mom casually mentions? And the more I thought about this, the more the pieces started to line up in a way that ran a chill down my spine. But before we go crashing into this theory like Coraline's family crashed into that truck, hit that subscribe button. It may just wake you up from your coma. At the beginning of the movie, after the Jones family moved into the Pink Palace, Coraline takes her dowsing rod and goes on to do some water witching, where she then has her first encounter with Wybie, who tells her the dowsing rod she chose isn't just a normal stick, it's actually poison oak. He then goes on to explain to Coraline about the well and the rumors surrounding it, as well as the history. The scene then cuts to Coraline looking out the window having a conversation with her half-paying attention mother, explaining how she almost died yesterday, and how they should go outside to do some gardening, but her mother thinks otherwise. But within this scene, an interesting detail flies right over most of our heads, including me the first 100 times I've watched this movie. Because Coraline's mom goes on to say, "But then we had the accident," as she points to her neck and there's a brace around it. And then Coraline goes on to reply and says, "It wasn't my fault you hit that truck." And I want to take a moment and dig deeper into that reply, because Coraline's body language and tone doesn't just sound like she is denying she had any part in it. It actually sounds like the complete opposite. It seems as though she feels some type of guilt connected to the trauma, I mean, it's something any child would feel seeing their parent hurt, especially if they truly link that trauma to it being their own fault. But why am I focusing in on that? Well, apart from this being one sentence of dialogue, it actually opens up an event that takes place before we even ever see the Pink Palace. Think about it. This accident occurred before they moved, and it caused enough damage for her mom to need a neck brace. This isn't just some tiny fender bender or a small tap on the bumper. It would have to be a decently sized accident to require some medical attention. So what if this accident didn't just hurt Coraline's mom? What if it caused injuries to the whole Jones family, potentially putting Coraline in a coma? But if Coraline is in a coma, what about the other world? The neighbors, the ghost children, and even Wybie? Well, if we use my previous theory about Coraline dreaming her way into the other world as a starting point, a lot of what I said there can be applied here. With my theory about her not being awake during the events of the movie, dreaming her way into the other world, accessing a dreamlike dimension, one I believe that the Beldam's world is built off of, the same rules would still apply. But with Coraline potentially now rooted in the accident, as it seems as though she was present for it, and with her now being put into a coma, she is still technically dreaming. Only now it's just one very long dream. Not a normal dream like you'd have scheduled for your regular 8 hours every night. No, this time the stakes are a little higher than just the emotional ties. It's now life or death. You see, Coraline's brain is now placed in survival mode. It's not as alert anymore because its main goal would be to stay alive. And that leaves an opening for one tragic thing. Because with this accident, the only other car described in the accident is a truck. And that's pretty broad, but if we go all the way back to the very beginning before we ever even see Coraline for the first time, there's one thing we do see: a moving truck. What if while Coraline's family was moving from Michigan to Oregon, they were unfortunately hit by the moving truck? And with Coraline's last thoughts being on how she doesn't want to move, that being later expressed in the film while looking at an old photo of her friends, and with her thinking about where she's going, the Pink Palace, her mind has just enough information to start filling in some gaps as she dreams. Enough information for the Pink Palace, her idea of the place, or even her neighbors. But what about Wybie and the ghost children? And most importantly, what about the Beldam? With Coraline filling in the gaps, building the version of the Pink Palace throughout her mind, I want to shift our focus firstly to the neighbors. Have you ever thought about how weird they are? I mean, look at Mr. Bobinski. He's an 8-foot tall blue man with skinny limbs and a big beer belly, who can do acrobats and talk to mice, and he even wants to train those mice for his jumping circus. It just seems so odd. But it's exactly someone a child would envision as their neighbor, somewhere they haven't been. Coraline's imagination is at full effect, and thinking about living with neighbors can spark endless ideas. And then looking at Miss Spink and Miss Forcible, they are also strange, as they are theatrical performers, dramatic, and obsessed with their dogs, something a child would envision for their other neighbors. And both Miss Spink and Miss Forcible actually play a much larger role for Coraline throughout the film, assisting her as the movie goes on. And I have some reasonings as to why. When Coraline visits them for the first time, we see that they are knitting outfits for their sick dog, as they have done so for the others that are already sitting on the shelf, stuffed. But those costumes are not ordinary. They are angel costumes, and I think that's important as it may not only be representation for the dogs, but also to Miss Spink and Forcible, as since they are aiding Coraline, they act like her guardian angel. And when Miss Spink reads Coraline's future, it warns her of a terrible danger coming toward, kind of like her brain is sending her a signal while she's in her coma, the protectiveness of staying alive. But they aren't the only ones who help Coraline. When taking a look at good old Wybie, he too helps Coraline toward the end of the film, when Coraline goes to destroy the key, but the Beldam's hands follow her, and Wybie helps Coraline break it, tying it up with the key, and ultimately tossing it down the well. But looking at Wybie, I think Coraline imagined him along with her neighbors. You see, when Coraline leaves Michigan to go to Oregon, she also is leaving behind her friends, and looking at the photo of them, they are both boys. Coraline would probably want another friend around her age, and since her previous friends were boys, Wybie is the perfect replacement for them. Along with this, Mr. Bobinski, Miss Spink, and Miss Forcible, and Wybie all have something that ties her to being in a coma. The fact that all of them, after meeting Coraline with a proper introduction, pronounce her name wrong, and that would make sense as they would never have met her, or even the fact of they aren't actually real. So if Coraline is stuck dreaming all of these people, where does the beldam come from? Well, if Coraline is stuck in a coma state, the beldam would have enough of an opening on a weakened mind to infiltrate. Because even though Coraline is dreaming about the Pink Palace and the people surrounding it, her last emotional thoughts would be focused on dread, how her parents didn't care for her neighbors wouldn't know her, and overall how old the house is. And that's shown throughout the film, as her parents ignore her, she doesn't get to do what she likes or as she was promised, and because of that, the beldam is able to set up her trap for Coraline. And you might be asking why the beldam would need to even have a little door, the mice, the doll, and all of these elaborate measures to get to Coraline if she's simply in a coma. And I asked myself that also. But considering that Coraline's mind came up with this world, the beldam would still need to have some sort of gateway, one that requires Coraline to dream of another world. And with Coraline receiving that doll that looks exactly like her, something a child would dream of, and then thinking about the tiny door that's sealed off and what could have been there before it, then the beldam is able to prey on Coraline's dream, building off of her curiosity, ultimately convincing Coraline to go to the other world, almost trapping her forever. So where does the ghost children come in? When taking a look at those ghost children, we see 3 different ones, all from a different era, past victims trapped inside the beldam's world. And I believe that they are entirely real, not dreamt, not even tied to Coraline's coma. And I say this because when thinking about the Pink Palace, I think it does exist in the real world, just not in the same way we see Coraline envision it, because Coraline still knew where she was supposed to be going. She knew the name Pink Palace, she knew it was an old house, and it had other tenants. And if there was pictures, she probably saw it along with Mrs. Lovat, the owner of the Pink Palace, or even heard her parents talking to her or talking about it, and that was enough for her mind to build the dream version of the house. But the history around the house could still be real. There is a supernatural that seems to be tied to the other side. And I think that those ghost children were taken through their dreams of a better life and were lost forever. But one of those ghost children is Mrs. Lovat's twin sister. So how can that be? Just because I stated that Wybie can potentially be dreamt doesn't make Mrs. Lovat fictional. Again, if Coraline saw pictures, heard her name, then Coraline could have tied Wybie, her new friend, to someone she absolutely knows for certain is real and doesn't live within the Pink Palace. And when we think about the first time we hear Mrs. Lovat, it's strictly her voice. So maybe Coraline heard her parents having a conversation with her, heard her last name, and the fact she normally doesn't rent to people with children because her twin went missing there, making her sister's tragedy real along with the other ghost children. So if Coraline is really in a coma, if everything I've said is true, what does this mean for the end of the movie, in Coraline's fate? After defeating the beldam and returning to the happy dream, she could still ultimately spend the rest of her life in that coma, and it would make sense, because at the end of the film, the cat can still simply disappear, which shouldn't be possible. Or, Coraline could still be under the beldam's finger, as she waits for the next moment to strike Coraline again. But what do you think? Is Coraline even alive? Was any of this real? Or was Coraline in a coma? Everyone remembers Coraline for the tiny door, the alive-feeling tunnel, and the world waiting to trap her on the other side. But Coraline's story doesn't start with the door or what lies behind it. It starts with the doll. More importantly, it starts with how the doll came into her possession. Because yes, Wybie gave it to her, but it opens up the question as to why he had to. Because before Coraline ever crawls through that tunnel, the doll watches her and helps the other mother build the perfect world to trap her in. But there's one issue. Coraline isn't the first person this has ever happened to. In the opening scene, we see a doll being pulled into the beldam's world, where she tears it apart, removes the old features, and rebuilds it into the doll that looks exactly like Coraline Jones. But how did the beldam summon it to the other world after so many years? And who does the doll represent? Later in the movie, we actually find out who that doll used to belong to. Wybie's grandma's twin sister, who disappeared when they were kids. And Wybie tells us how his grandma says she was stolen from them when they were young, showing how Mrs. Lovat knows the danger residing within the Pink Palace, and how she normally doesn't allow people with children to rent the place. But that raises the question, Why allow Coraline and her family to move in if she knows the danger? After meeting Wybie, Coraline receives a gift left by him, a mini her. Wybie gives Coraline that doll, resulting in it snowballing into all of the following events within the movie. But why did Wybie have it? In the note he left with the doll, he explains how he found it and thought it looked just like her, so he figured she should have it. But if the Beldam was able to summon it to her world and make it look like Coraline, why not just place it within the Pink Palace for Coraline to find on her own? Why give it back to the Lovats? It makes me think that the doll was still connected to the Lovat family in some way. I mean, it's in their possession, and with Miss Lovat's exception for Coraline's family moving in, I don't think she forgot the danger. I think she was afraid for Wybie. Because we see Wybie hanging around the Pink Palace and the property a lot. With the doll being that close to him and with him being nosy, he could have stumbled into the Pink Palace, making him the Beldam's next victim. So maybe Mrs. Lovat was trying to protect Wybie, but by letting Coraline's family move in, she accidentally gave the Beldam something even better, a new child already inside the Pink Palace. With this in mind, I don't think the first scene takes place on the same timeline as we think it does, because even though it was shown as the first scene in the movie, if the doll was with the Lovats, the Beldam wouldn't know what Coraline would look like before she moved in. So how did she find out? I believe the Beldam sends Coraline through the well, because when Coraline is talking to Wybie, he gives the well's history. He says how people say if you fell in, you'd fall so deep, you'd see the stars. And like many other theories, I believe this is another gate into the other world. And with that gateway, Coraline may have been close enough for the Beldam to sense her, and the Beldam could have potentially used that to make the doll just like her. But the well still doesn't give the Beldam everything, it just helps her know another child is close enough to lure her into her trap. So the Lovats having the doll is still important, because even if the Beldam summoned the doll into her world, maybe she can't send it anywhere besides where it last had the strongest emotional connection, that being the Lovats. Wybie's grandma kept it because it reminded her of her twin sister. That strong emotional connection could be what was binding it to the real world, and to the Lovats. And maybe that's why she wants it back later within the movie, because it belonged to her sister, not Coraline. And that points to the timeline of the Beldam changing the doll to after Coraline is already within the Pink Palace. Because if it was changed before, Miss Lovat would have probably noticed that the doll no longer looks like her sister. So with the doll stuck with the Lovats and no sight on Coraline, the Beldam had to be creative. She used Wybie. After Wybie meets Coraline, she sends it back to the Lovats for Wybie to find and deliver to Coraline, making her form a new emotional connection because of it looking just like her. So now that the doll is no longer bound to the Lovat, it acts as the first step to setting up the trap for Coraline, because now the Beldam has eyes and can see what Coraline truly desires. So the doll isn't just as it appears. It's not just some creepy doll, and it's not just the Beldam spy. It's the object that connects everything within the movie. Miss Lovat's sister being taken, the old doll being brought back, Wybie getting too close to the Pink Palace, and Coraline's family moving in, allowing the Beldam to prey on her newest victim and having a way to watch Coraline's every move. Why does Coraline have to sleep to go back to the real world? Every time I've rewatched this amazing film, that detail has always been something that stood out to me, and I can never quite wrap my head around why. Because every time Coraline enters the other world, it's through the little door, and every time she leaves, all she has to do is fall asleep. But how does that work? When we're first introduced to the other mother and her extravagant world, the only way for Coraline to go back to reality is to fall asleep, waking up back at home. And the one thing that's always troubled me about that is why she can enter one way and leave another. And I think I finally found the answer as to why. When Coraline first crawls through the little door and experiences the best nights of her life, she always ends up falling asleep in the other world to go back home. But what people seem to forget is that before any of this even happens, Coraline actually falls asleep beforehand. And taking an interesting turn in looking at our very own reality, there are many people who theorize that dreams can allow you to access different planes of reality, or even different dimensions. And if we apply that very same idea to Coraline, it leads me to believe that the other world is built on one of these dreamlike dimensions. And unfortunately for Coraline, she was already slipping into it before she even touched the tunnel. Because when she begged her mom to open the door, it filled her mind with enough curiosity and imagination, planting a seed for the Beldam to grow, meaning Coraline was already dreaming her way inside of the tunnel, and the curiosity behind it. And that makes her mind the true gateway. Because when Coraline first wakes up to the mice before heading into the tiny little door, maybe she isn't truly awake. What if she's already dreaming? And if this is true, then it would make sense as to why she falls asleep to leave the other world, waking up back home. And you might be sitting there asking yourself, hey, not every time Coraline visits the other world she was asleep. And you'd be right, but not in the way you think. You see, yes, Coraline did enter the other world during the day, but that's only after her mom leaves. And with Coraline being a kid, left home alone, and having experienced the most amazing dreams of a new life, Coraline's imagination kicks in, almost as if she's daydreaming. But if she's daydreaming, why can't she escape the same way? And what happens when she leaves through the tunnel to go back home? When Coraline refuses to sew buttons into her eyes and live in the other world forever, she panics and tries to fall asleep to go back home. But there's a problem. It doesn't work anymore. Because Coraline didn't enter the same way she once did. She wasn't fully asleep. And yes, she was technically dreaming, but now it's a different game. Because when she would lay in her bed, fully falling asleep, her brain was still somewhat alert. And I know I'm not the only one that when having a nightmare, you realize you're in a dream and try to force yourself out of it. Kind of just like how Coraline did the first time she ever went to the other world. Because after dinner, the other mother welcomes her home, and her brain notices this, so she goes to bed and wakes up at home. But now, with Coraline daydreaming, her brain isn't alert of reality the same way. It's filled with dopamine, imagination, and desires of the better life. Meaning her brain isn't on alert the same way, so Coraline can't simply sleep her way out of it like she used to before. And with Coraline now afraid and desperate to go home, the Beldam has enough influence over Coraline's mind because her guards went up way too late, fully trapping her there. But Coraline's daydreaming didn't just affect her. Because while Coraline is trapped inside the other world and the Beldam showing her true face, the Beldam locks Coraline behind a mirror after she refused to apologize. That mirror being the same one where her old victims are, the ghost children. And one of those ghost children just so happened to be Mrs. Lovat's twin sister, who was stolen from them as kids. Then, the other YB saves Coraline, and with his help she manages to escape, but at the other end, a bigger problem is waiting. Her parents are gone. More accurately, they were stolen by the Beldam and put into a snow globe. But how? Well, when we think about Coraline daydreaming her way into the other world, she left an opening. Because when Coraline daydreamed, she weakened the barrier between her mind and the Beldam's world. And all the Beldam needs is an opening in the mind, which she now has. And when Coraline escaped the other world through the tunnel, her mind is still bound to it. And if we use my previous theory about the doll and the emotional connection surrounding the object, I think the same emotional connection can be applied to her parents, and it would explain how the Beldam can take Coraline's parents because of her emotional connection to them. And with that, the Beldam sets the trap, forcing Coraline to come back to her world. But why does the Beldam need an opening in the mind? Why not just go through the tunnel? Because when taking a look at the true Beldam, she resembles a spider. But not no ordinary one, because she builds her world, summons objects, controls the life within her realm, and manipulates everything within it. She doesn't just have an ordinary web, she has a mental one, built off children's dreams, desires, and life force. And taking a closer look at the tunnel, I think its use is more than what meets the eye. I believe the tunnel is a corrupt version of a dream catcher. Because dream catchers are primarily used to protect someone as they fall asleep and pass into the dream world, filtering out any nightmares and bad energies that go their way. But with the Beldam's tunnel, it symbolizes the exact opposite. Instead of helping children get away from their nightmares, it leads them straight to it. Because when Coraline falls asleep and she passes through the corrupted dream catcher, she ends up in a nightmare. And looking at nightmares, they usually start like any other dream, but quickly turn into the worst kind. But if it's a dream catcher, and the world is in a dreamlike dimension, why can YB see what Coraline does? YB is stated to be 13 years old, only 2 years older than Coraline is, which still puts him in the age range where imagination is still there and dreams still feel real. And knowing his grandma's twin sister went missing at the Pink Palace, and being so close to that story presumably his whole life, we can assume his curiosity is piqued. So even when he calls Coraline crazy later in the film after she escapes the Beldam's world, I think part of him still somewhat believes her. And once he starts thinking about it and daydreaming about it, I think he may have unintentionally opened himself into the same web Coraline did. Because after he helps Coraline crush the hand and send it into the well, he hands her a picture of his grandma and her twin, showing he never stopped thinking about the whole situation, and his imagination kept him connected. But there is still the question as to why Coraline is dusty when she leaves the other world for the last time. When Coraline escapes the Beldam after playing a game where she has to collect the 3 ghost children's eyes from each of the wonders around the Pink Palace and the snow globe her parents are trapped in, she escapes rushing through the tunnel covering herself in dust. But if the other world is a dreamlike dimension, then why does she have something physical covering her body? I believe that the tunnel is one of the places that can overlap with reality through the child's mind, through the Dreamcatcher's filter. Because when she brings the other world snow globe into the real one, the link between the dream world and the real one is shattered, freeing her parents from the frozen prison. And the same goes for the ghost children's eyeballs, because they aren't actually eyeballs, they are objects symbolizing them. And they also break free being linked to the real world, setting the souls of the children's free. But how does Coraline break this link she has to the other world? The one object that doesn't have a replica between the other world and the real one is the key shaped like a button. And the only way to break the link that Coraline has is to lock the door and throw the key away forever, because it's the thing holding her mind, the tunnel, and the other world together. And as long as it exists, the Beldam can prey on her victims forever. It's the last thread enabling her to trap them. And before Coraline can get rid of it forever, the hand is able to use the not yet destroyed connection and break free to retrieve it, because without it, the Beldam can't do anything. So when it finds Coraline and tries to bring her back to the Pink Palace, YB shows up and helps Coraline destroy the hand and the key, tossing it down the well, destroying the final mental connection, ending the nightmare. So now with everything that Coraline has gone through, it finally makes sense. The other world was never a physical place. It was her dream, her desires, her better life. And that dream can only stay open as long as Coraline's mind did. Her breaking the only connection and mentally closing it out stops the Beldam from catching her prey. But what do you think? Did Coraline escape the other world, or is she still in her dream? What if I told you we are finally getting our hands on our real life Coraline, but just not in the way we intended? See, there's this new movie releasing on October 9th of this year called The Other Mommy. Now, if that doesn't ring any bells, then maybe me breaking down the story of this film may actually help. But before we go getting into the disturbing lore of The Other Mommy and how this film may just be our next Coraline, hit that subscribe button, or you may just have to figure out if your mom is truly your mom. See, The Other Mommy is based off a book written by Josh Malerman called Incidents Around the House, released in 2024. And reading the plot summary of the book, we can start to see how close this movie is going to be to our childhood favorite Coraline. See, the story goes through an 8-year-old girl's perspective named Bella and her parents Ursula and Russ, and they seem to have a deeply strained marriage, causing emotional distance and arguments. And not only that, but to add to the flame, within the book, the mom also has an affair, which Bella, even though being young, realizes. Bella also has been visited for several years by a strange entity emerging from her closet she calls the Other Mommy. And I don't know about you guys, but this closet seems to be acting like the tunnel, just like in Coraline. Continuing on, Bella and this other mother continue to hang out, and Bella enjoys the attention she gets from the thing, as her parents seem to be too busy for her, and her parents just dismiss Bella when she explains the other mother, and brush it off as if it's just a thing of her imagination. And I'm going to be completely honest, parents should definitely be listening to their children more often, as even in Coraline, her parents do the exact same thing. And before I go spoiling the whole plot of the film right now, as I'm not sure how much they change from its book counterpart, I think it's best we leave it here and discuss it further on within our video. But I see a few reasons to believe this other mommy is actually our old friend, the Beldam. So let me explain. See, when doing some digging on the good old web and searching what this entity Bella encounters, my first thought was that this thing was a demon, a classic horror movie trope. But to my shock, when actually asking the web, this thing isn't stated to be a demon. Obviously, that doesn't fully rule it out, but even in the book, it's referred to as an entity. And seeing how there is some pretty strong similarities, this other mommy could very well be a Beldam herself. And to keep our minds refreshed, I'm gonna quickly recap the film story of Coraline. Coraline moves into the Pink Palace. She meets a boy named Wybie who ends up gifting her a doll that looks exactly like her. That doll actually being made by the Beldam as a spy. The doll then leads Coraline to the tiny door after moving when she placed it down in the room with the boring blue boy. Later that night, she wakes up to mice and they lead her to the door, where she crawls through the tunnel and meets her other mother. She's kind of thrown off by the buttons, but couldn't resist the food she smells and stays. And she goes on to travel to this world a few more times, to where the Beldam then, after a night of fun, says for her to stay forever, Coraline would have to sew buttons into her eyes, which Coraline refuses and she gets trapped, and the Beldam doesn't look like her mommy no longer. Coraline is then put behind a mirror where the 3 ghost children reside, victims of the Beldam's past. And here's actually where we learn that the true name for the other mother is indeed the Beldam. Then Coraline, with the help of the other Wybie, escapes but is forced to go back as the Beldam has taken her real parents. Coraline then offers to play a game which the Beldam loves, where she has to find the 3 ghost children's eyes and her parents, where she ultimately exceeds with the help of the cat, but the hand of the Beldam follows her, and then she has to break it with the help of real Wybie, and she is now free. So the real question now is, how does this relate to the other mommy movie, and what the heck even is the Beldam? Going into folklore of the Beldam, there isn't actually a direct one called the Beldam, but the word Beldam actually refers to the 15th century word Beldam, which Bel meaning fine/beautiful and Dam meaning mother, and it was usually used for grandmas or ancestors. However, it shifted into the horror scene in the late 16th century when women were being associated with witchcraft, and the definition changed to refer to a hag or a witch. And Neil Gaiman actually combined the two, forming what we know as the other mother, with a beautiful exterior but a sinister inside. And in Western European fae folklore, a fairy would kidnap a human infant and leave a fake wooden or even magical copy to take its place. So with both Coraline and the other mommy, they actually flip it, and instead of the creature making it as if they replaced the child, they become something the child desires in the form of those they love. See, not only do they both take the shape of Coraline and Bella's mothers, but they both desire something deeper. Something I left out of the summary is something that the other mother repeatedly asks Bella, which is, "May I enter your heart?" which we actually hear her say in the trailer itself.
Can I go into your heart?
But why would she need to ask, or why does she even want Bella's heart? See, something these two Beldams share is the fact that they need to take or take over something that belongs to their prey. In Coraline, it was her eyes, but in the other mommy, it's her heart. See, in the plot summary of the book, it states that Bella knows that if she let the other mommy take over, they would trade places, allowing the entity to take over her body while she remains somewhere else. So Bella, being the smart girl she is, keeps on denying it, but over time it begins to become more aggressive. And spoiler warning for the book, as I mentioned earlier about covering it, Bella actually allows the other mommy into her heart, and Bella is left in an empty void where she can hear the other mommy practicing her voice, as now her body has been taken over. See, yes, there's definitely differences between Coraline's Beldam and this one, but both, crazy enough, do the same thing. Both take over or imitate the child's parent, preying on their desires and using it as an opening to get what they want. Both need permission and acceptance from their prey in order to fully consume and take over them. And we see with the beldam from Coraline, she wants their eyes. See, the reason for this, well, my idea is it's the only thing that now makes the child unable to see through her lies and see what she truly is. And for the other mommy, she needs the heart as it's our body's life force. And in order for this sinister beldam to take over Bella and reincarnate herself within her, she needs her life, which is why she always bugs Bella to let her into her heart. On top of that, both the beldam and the other mommy actually share a lot of mannerisms, like the way they cook food for both Coraline and Bella, and even the real beldam appearance and the way they smile. See, in the trailer, we see the other mommy take a spider form when hiding under the table, kind of how the beldam is, because in Coraline, the true form resembles a spider. So overall, looking at these similarities, this film seems to be shaping out to be a very interesting film, and one that reminds me so heavily of Coraline, and I'm very excited to see how this movie turns out, as it may just be the more creepy, more unsettling version of Coraline itself. But I really want to know what you guys think of this down below in the comment section, because to me, this movie has big expectations in my eyes. Or do you think I'm absolutely crazy? And with that, I ask, are the other mother and the other mommy one in the same, or maybe two beldams in two different worlds? Growing up, I've been surrounded by many films that felt like a fever dream to me. Movies like Coraline, Nine, James and the Giant Peach, and many, many others. And Where the Wild Things Are is no different. From getting the book read to me when I was young, to then seeing the very creepy movie released in 2009, this movie just hits a part of my brain that I can't even describe, and I believe many of us have completely forgotten about it. And after watching this film and reading the book for the first time in years, I have some theories to talk about, like what the wild things truly are and what Max's journey symbolizes. But before we start getting wild, hit that subscribe button as we let the wild rumpus start. Inside the movie, Where the Wild Things Are, we go through the journey of a boy named Max. And at the beginning of the film, he builds an igloo out of the snow all alone and wants his sister Claire to play with him, but she ultimately ignores him. And after a while, his sister's boyfriend arrives along with her friends, and Max sneaks around and starts a snowball fight that ends very badly, as Claire and her friends end up breaking Max's igloo, causing Max to cry and rush into his sister's room, destroying a gift he made for her. Max then goes to his room, where we see his drawings on the wall, creations which will be important later, and also a globe left to him by his father. His mom then shows up and says she would have said something unlike what his sister did, and some time passes as we see him playing in the schoolyard, sitting in class learning about the sun, and then we end up on the night where everything suddenly goes wrong. As Max goes downstairs after calling his mom to play Floor is Lava and being ignored, he oversees his mom on a date with someone, and Max doesn't seem happy. He then causes a ruckus and bites his mom and takes off into the night, regretting what he has done. But he no longer feels welcome in his own home. He feels alone. And this is where the wild things truly begins. As Max finds a boat, which I assume he made, and ventures out at sea for what looks like days and ends up on an island with some other monsters already there. After Max gets on the island, he observes a wreckage unfolding before his eyes, as a monster is breaking down huts in a fit of rage. Max then joins him, and we later learn more about each of the wild things and their names. We meet Carol, the main monster who was destroying the houses, KW, Douglas, Judith, Ira, Alexander, and the Quiet Bull. Max then becomes their king, and there is some dialogue here that is interesting, as they say, "I like it better when we have a king. I like Carol better when we have a king," which implies there may have been another king, which I have an idea on who that could be, but more on that later. Max then makes the promise to keep the sadness away and forever have fun, and they all go out having wild adventures, and decide to build a home where they can all sleep in one big pile as a family. And throughout all of the adventures Max and these wild things go on, we see elements of, say, the real world, like a cat, a raccoon, and a dog that is gigantic for some reason. But I really want to focus on these wild things because even if we take a look at the book, which is definitely different from the movie, the creatures are left unnamed and shown to be a thing of Max's imagination. In the movie, we get to explore deeper into the world of the wild and how each of these characters react to one another and how they truly feel. But majority of this film is still left unexplained. When taking a look at each of the so-called monsters, I actually believe they represent one of two things. They are either Max's internal emotions made physical, or they represent people in Max's life, which for today's video, we're going to focus on the emotion side, as each of the creatures feel more like a piece of Max rather than people surrounding him. However, the second idea is still very interesting, and perhaps in a future video, we can explore it while taking an even deeper dive into the rest of the film. For now, taking a look at the 7 monsters, I have an idea of what each of them represent as Max's emotions. Starting with Alexander, the goat-like creature, I believe he is Max's insecurity, as he is the tiniest of the monsters and is also often ignored, saying lines like, "Does no one ever hear me?" And it makes sense for him to be the tiniest in that case. Then taking a look at Douglas, the bird-like monster, I believe he is the emotions of loyalty and rationality, as even from the beginning, he is the one trying to keep Carol at bay, and is always trying to make sure everyone is organized, as when Max was breaking their houses, he only got mad at Max, not Carol, as it seems Douglas has his very own idea of rules in place. Then the pair, Judith and Ira. I think Judith represents selfishness as she is very defensive over things and is also jealous, as when Carol and Max draw on the fort, she starts to feel like Max was playing favorites. And Ira, I believe, is the kindness and creativity, as he built things and punches holes in trees like art and digs the tunnel to the fort for everyone to use. Then the bull. He clearly represents Max's sadness and isolation, and he is more of a loner compared to the rest of the group, and is always quiet until the very end of the film. And now for the main 2 monsters, KW and Carol. I believe KW is Max's empathy and emotional maturity, as she isn't really destructive like the rest, and is shown to be the more mature one out of all of them. She also seems to symbolize that actions result in consequences, as when Carol was destructive, it pushed her further away. And finally, Carol. Carol is the one emotion that Max shows the most throughout the film. Anger, frustration, and impulsiveness. Essentially, Max's wild side, as he does want everyone to be a family, but when something doesn't go his way, he goes from 0 to 100 and becomes out of control. Just like before Max took off and bit his own mother, even though it wasn't intentional. And putting all of these together, if we take a look back to when Max first arrived, he gets circled by all of the emotions, something scary. And if you think about him running away from home, all the emotions he would feel at once would be hard for a child to take control of. And now if we take a look at what I said earlier about how I may know who the previous king of these monsters were, and now knowing what each monster represents, it all starts to make a little more sense. When circling back to before we even meet the wild things, when Max is in his room looking at the globe his father left him, and also looking at the fact of him being angry at his mother being on a date with another man, I think that the previous king, the one who helped Max navigate his emotions, was his dad. And it makes the most sense, as it's clear that his dad either passed away or his parents simply got a divorce. And with Max now left kind of on his own in his own household, as he doesn't have his dad around, it allows his emotions to run wild. And when Max tries to fill in his father's role of being king, he doesn't fully understand how to at his young age. And the film seems to represent that perfectly. Another thing I want to talk about is the journey to and from the island of the wild things. As when Max runs away and when he goes back home, I'm assuming it's still the very same day, as when he runs away and when he runs back home, it is still nighttime. And I feel as though his mother would show more concern than what she did at the end of the movie. But looking at Max sailing through the sea, I think it symbolizes his emotional journey of maturity and control over himself. And looking at the book itself, it pretty much shows the same thing, as when Max in the book goes to where the wild things are and then tells them to go to bed without eating like his mom did to him, He was left lonely, wanting to be loved, and he sailed back home after smelling the food his mother made. So in the end, Where the Wild Things Are wasn't just a random movie like it first appears to be. Instead, it's about Max and him learning how to navigate his emotions and understand them, to understand himself. And maybe that's why this film hits so hard, because growing up feels like that island, so much chaos and trouble understanding the feelings you have. But in the end, you always eventually sail back to the place you call home. But what do you think about Where the Wild Things Are? Where the Wild Things Are, a story about a boy named Max and the adventure of his wild side. From the book released in 1963 to the movie adaptation released in 2009, this film was either seen as a classic or a very traumatic experience. Regardless, this movie has left an impact on me and my family growing up, and now that I've rewatched this amazing film a couple more times over, I have another theory on what the wild things truly are, apart from them being just a reflection of Max's emotions, that I actually theorized in my previous video I have linked down below for those to go watch after this one. Because what if they don't just symbolize his inner emotions, but people in his life? So before we end up taking off into the dark night and exploring this interesting island full of monsters, hit that subscribe button, as it may just keep these monsters away. For those unfamiliar with this film or even the book, it's a story about a boy named Max and his wild adventure, an emotional maturity journey, say that 5 times fast, through the land of the wilds. And in the film, it shows us Max and his impulsive behavior. And when he is in his room before chaos truly unfolds, after his igloo was destroyed by his sister and her friends, and her not helping him, he ends up destroying a handmade gift out of anger, and regrets it. But in his room, a lot of details for who the wild things represent are actually present. From the creation he makes, to the boat he uses against his blanket, to even the globe his father has left him. See, later on, after some time passes and it's no longer winter, it cuts to the night it all goes wrong. As when Max goes downstairs after calling his mom and she doesn't listen, we see her on a date, and he does some impulsive things, which results in him biting his mother and taking off into the night. And he ends up by some water where he finds a boat, then takes this boat what looks like over days, which it really isn't, but more on that later, and he arrives at the land of the wild things, where destruction is unfolding before his eyes. After Max becomes king, lying to these monsters saying he was a king before, him and these monsters go on crazy adventures. We meet Carol, KW, Douglas, Judith, Ira, and Alexander, and also the Quiet Bull. I'm not quite sure why the bull doesn't get a name, but I have some idea. But as the movie progresses, however, we learn that the reason Carol was destroying these houses Max witnessed at the beginning is because KW found 2 new friends, owls named Bob and Terry. And without spoiling too much, as you should definitely go check out this film, they eventually find out Max isn't king, Carol gets mad, and Max eventually goes home, where he eats dinner his mom made, reminiscent of the book. Because in the book made in 1963, Max smells his mother's food and he goes back home, and the food is waiting for him in his bedroom. Okay, now that we get the gist of the story and what it's about, what are these monsters meant to be? I mean, what are they truly? Well, in my previous theory, I theorized on how these monsters could symbolize Max's emotions, but for today I want to take a different route and relate them to potential people in Max's life. See, before we even get into the land of the wild and the night that causes it, back when Max was in his room, we see key details like I mentioned earlier, like the house he built out of sticks, the boat, and again the globe his father has left him. And looking at the wild things and the first time Max sees them, the type of house Carol is destroying, and even the one they build later on in the film with Max, resembles this very same one in his room. And then there's the boat that Max takes to the island of monsters, and it being the same boat we see him play with on his blanket as he lays down. And finally, the globe. This globe being the most important piece of it all. See, with the things in his room and the message on the globe, we can truly understand the world of the wild things, because when looking at the globe it reads, "You are the owner of this world, love, Dad." And this means 3 things. First, obviously meaning the globe itself. Second, being the fact as a parent you want the best for your kid and want them to feel no fear, to not feel smaller than the world that they are in, to essentially rule the world. And lastly, one that involves our theory, Max's dad says you are the owner of this world, but instead of the last 2 points, it means his world, Max's dad. Another thing about this movie is the fact that his dad isn't present. It isn't stated whether the dad passed away or even if his parents split apart, but regardless, his father isn't present, and in the book, if we think about how Max even ends up in the world of the wild, it is from his imagination, which I feel the same applies for our movie as well, because these pieces of the things in his room are all present in this world of the wild. And thinking of a child's imagination, him sailing on a blanket to the world his father left him, and the world of the wild with houses built like the ones he envisions out of stick, and being the king of all in that land, to essentially be free and never feel sadness. That is exactly what a child like Max would want, especially if he was close to his father. And Max even tells a story to his mother throughout the film about a vampire who bites the tallest skyscraper that can walk, and he loses his fangs, along with his other teeth. And the other vampires come and ask if they were his baby teeth, which that vampire replies no, and the other vampires abandon him. And this is important as I feel like it shows how Max is afraid of growing up and feeling abandoned. The teeth foreshadowing him biting his mother, and when doing so, being abandoned by his mother and his sister. And maybe it was also how he feels now that his father is gone. So what does this mean for our creatures? When looking at each of our wild creatures, there are 2 possibilities of what each of these things can represent. One being is that each of these monsters is a different person in Max's life, and 2, using the globe and seeing as Max being the owner/king of his father's world, each one of our monsters can also be pieces of his dad. Starting with who each of these characters could represent, we should start with our main wild thing, Carol. Carol is Max's father. See, Carol throughout the film displays the full embrace of the wild, but also yearns for unity and personally takes Max under his wing, and is the closest to Max throughout the whole film. Carol starts off the whole journey with Max, and he even shows him his display of the kingdom, of the world of the wild things. And he also symbolizes some unwanted qualities, like his rage and uncontrollability. So there's a chance that even if, say, his father didn't pass away, the reason for his parents' split is shown through Carol and also KW, as KW would be Max's mother, as even shown at the beginning of the film. And even throughout, KW seems to have a very valuable place in Carol's heart, and vice versa. But because of how Carol acted, it pushes KW away. And in one scene, KW has to hide Max because Carol found out Max lied about being a king and said he was going to eat him, which is sorta terrifying. Anyway, looking at Judith and Ira, I believe these 2 to represent Max's sister and her boyfriend, as they seem to be a couple in this wild land and always stick together. Now Douglas would be Max's teachers or even any other authority figures, maybe even Max's father's friend, as Douglas seems to have rules and is Carol's right hand throughout the film, helping Carol and even only getting mad at Max and not Carol when the destruction of their houses is going on at the beginning. Now, Alexander. Alexander would represent Max himself, as looking at the appearance, he is the smallest out of the group. He is often shown to be unheard and seems to be the one that stands out or doesn't quite fit in, kind of like Max's story about the vampires in a way. Now for the quiet bull. I think this wild thing represents Max's grief over his father or even the overall sadness in general, as it's often seen alone and doesn't even talk until the very end of the film. But no matter what, it's there, even if it doesn't feel like it is. And if, say, each of these wild things were his dad's emotions, Carol would be his father's angers and impulsiveness, KW would be his father's gentle side, often pushed away by the anger, feeling like it isn't there, Douglas would be his father's logic, the way he allows anger's actions but not Max's, showing levels to the behavior, and Judith would be his father's defensiveness, and maybe even selfishness, as they try to protect what is theirs, and also feels like they aren't being treated equal when Max does things with Carol that he doesn't do with her. Ira would be his father's creativity, the holes in the trees, and the tunnels he digs for the house they built together show that. Alexander would maybe be his father's insecurity, and maybe it wasn't a lot as Alexander is small. And the bull would be his father's silence and absence, and it isn't really there only at the end of the film. It's also possible that using what the bull says, "Will you say good things about us?" Maybe the land of the wild was really his father's house that he ran to, making it the land of the wild. He felt like his mom was moving on from his father, which made him act out and take off into the night to his father's house, potentially. But I see that more or less as unlikely. Because when looking at the book, which the movie used as a reference point, Max used his imagination to make this land what it is, and then he travels back out of his made-up land and comes back home. And just like Max in the movie, going back to his room, we see all the details that are present in where the wild things live. So that's why I love this movie, because behind its strange and maybe unsettling nature, it's about a boy who builds a land through his imagination and trying to hold on to his father, who he clearly misses closely, as he tries to understand the world around him. But what do you think these wild things truly are? Are they people Max misses, or just the pieces of someone he lost? What if 9 and the other Stitchpunks were never meant to survive? As there is a lot of unanswered questions I have with the scientist's end goal, and even why the machine has a slot for the talisman left with 9 that powers it back on. And after watching this movie on repeat for some time and looking closely, I have a theory about it all. But before we go and cause the apocalypse, hit that subscribe button. Let's not let the machines take over. In the movie 9, we go through a journey in a post-apocalyptic world as each of the 9 Stitchpunks try to survive as humanity's last hope. At the beginning of the film, when 9, the 9th Stitchpunk, I know the name's very fitting, first wakes up, he grabs a device we later learn through the film is a talisman that can transfer the souls and or fractions of a soul from humans and the Stitchpunks and either keep it inside of it or transfer it to something else. 9 then ventures out and finds 2, another Stitchpunk of the 9 created, and this is where the first encounter with the robots that ended humanity happened, as a cat-like robot finds them, and then 2 is ultimately taken away along with the talisman. Then, 5 spots 9 through a spyglass after 9 collapse, and 5 takes him back to their hideout, where we also then meet 1, 8, and 6. And after finding out what happened to 2, 1 suggests that they stay, but 9 and 5 decide to go looking for him, and they ultimately find him along with the beast from before, and as they are escaping with 2, the beast notices and almost catches them, but then 7 arrives and defeats the beast, but what comes next is what I want to focus on. As 9 finds the talisman again, he looks at it, as well as there seems to be a spot for it on a machine we later learned that the scientist who made the Stitchpunks and this talisman also made. 9 then unknowingly connects it to the machine, and it powers up and ultimately sucks up the soul of 2. The others are then forced to leave him behind, and they follow 7 to where she and the twins are, 3 and 4. But I have a few problems with what just happened, because if we go towards the middle and end of the film, after learning more about the history of the war from the twins, they show news about what went down before the events of the film. We see a political figure announcing the robot we see 9 power on. It was actually being used as a weapon for advanced warfare that ultimately turned sour and turned against humanity. And then closer to the end of the film, when 9 travels back to where the movie began, we finally hear the scientist's message he left for 9. And the message goes something like this. It had such promise, my machine. It was meant to be an instrument of progress, of creation. That was the agreement our Chancellor failed to honor, though the fault is hardly his alone to bear. The machine was born purely of my intellect, which I now know was not enough. My creation was hopelessly flawed, and indeed dangerous, for it lacked the human soul, and could be easily corrupted by those who controlled it. That is why I'm making each of you, referring to 9 and the other Stitchpunks, you are all that's left of humanity. You are all the pieces of my soul. And there is a lot to unpack from this speech, but now we know he didn't make the machine with the intent of harm. Instead, he made it as a reflection of his intelligence. But if we take the line, for it lacked a human soul, there's something that I think he did. Because if we take a look at the talisman, it serves multiple uses. Because looking at the flashback of the machine, it isn't using the talisman. Instead, the scientist is plugged into the machine, enabling the machine to copy his intellect. So what if sometime in between and looking at some sketches he has in his room regarding the robot, he made the talisman to give the machine the one thing it lacked, a human soul. But what does this mean for the 9 Stitch Punks? And why did he split his soul? And also, what does each Stitch Punk represent? Well, continuing through the film, as we learn more about each of the Stitch Punks and their personalities, we can make some assumptions of which part of the scientist's soul they are. Starting from 1, from the second we meet 1, he attains the role of leadership and authority, and that's fitting as he was the first ever Stitch Punk. We also learn he is afraid and will do anything to survive, so we can assume he reflects the instincts for caution, fear, and protection as he tries to survive. We also learn that 1 through 8 were alive during the events of the war, as it was ongoing, but more on that in a moment. When looking at 2, I think he represents the curiosity part of the soul, as he is eager to learn about the things and explore, and he's innovative as well as creating tools and weapons for survival. Now looking at the twins 3 and 4, they are shown to be the memory, as they're nonverbal and they keep track of history, shown when they present what happened when they meet with 9. And they are keeping humanity's history preserved. Now with 5, this is the part of the soul I believe is for compassion and caring, and it's fitting as he is kind of like a medic. He stitches up 9 at the beginning of the film and is always wanting to help his friends. Now with 6, I believe he is the scientist's beliefs and artistry, as he is also slightly visionary and knows about the talisman and what happens to those when they are sucked into it, as when 6 is present for 5's soul being taken by the machine, he sees their soul in the machine's lens and says they aren't gone. 7 is the courage, as 7 is a fearless warrior who has survived on their own and able to understand how to defeat the beast and fight. 8 is the strength, as he is the biggest out of the Stitch Punks and is the strongest. And finally, 9. 9 I believe is the will of the scientist, as 9 seems to have the drive to finish what was started, to bring back humanity any way he can, and nothing stops him from that. But what does this all mean? Well, now that we have a general idea of each of the Stitch Punks, I want to go over what I said earlier about how Stitch Punks 1 through 8 were present during the events of the war, as 1 explains how mankind and metal went to battle. And the reason I bring this up is because it means the scientists created them during the war, sometime after the machine was built and taken and before 9 was ever created. So the scientists' plan to save humanity was already in effect, and the talisman was already made. So what if the scientists continued to work with the Chancellor and added the component that allowed the machine to gain humanity, but before he could give up his soul, he made each of the Stitch Punks to separate it in case of it failing. And since it was during the war, sacrificing himself without proving it to be effective first, or when the machine was actively against humanity, his soul could have been taken and corrupted the same way the machine was. But if that's the case, does that mean all of the Stitch Punks were created in the intent of dying? This is where my theory hits a crossroads, as a scientist never states that the job of the Stitch Punks is to destroy the machine, or even destroy themselves. The only thing he says in his message to 9 is for him and the others to save humanity, as he demonstrates the talisman sequence and how to operate it. But it's left open as to what 9 is supposed to do with that. Yes, 9 learns how to use it after the events of majority of the film, but if it played out differently, what was the end goal? Well, I have 2 main ideas. The first being that when looking at the end of the film, 9 opens the talisman, setting free those they lost. 1, 2, 5, 6, and 8. And as their part of the scientist's soul reaches the clouds, it starts to rain, and inside soul fragments reside, symbolizing a rebirth of new life. The only thing is not all of them made it to those clouds, only a partial soul was used to make this, so parts of humanity is still technically missing, as 9, 7, 3, and 4 survived. So their parts of the scientist's soul never gets carried onto this rebirth, meaning it is possible those qualities of a soul are forever missing. So the scientists may be intended for them to use the device to release the soul from each of the Stitch Punks after the war was over, creating a new cycle of humanity, saving it. Or, with my second idea, going back and looking at the machine, since it has a slot for the talisman the scientists made, maybe the scientists intended for them to find that machine and become sacrifices so the machine can become complete with the human soul. But if it gains the soul, how does it guarantee that it will rebuild humanity? Well, that's the thing. These 9 Stitchpunks were essentially set up from the beginning, no matter what, as both ways we look at it, they were meant to be passed on. In the robot's case, it having no leader, no corruptor anymore, yes, it ended humanity, but considering that the fact it's built from the scientist's intellect, if we gave it the soul as well, it would technically be the scientist. And with all fractions of his soul, the machine may gain enough humility to know how to save humanity, and maybe build a new life that coexists with machines, one that truly brings peace, like it was intentionally made to do from the very beginning. And maybe because the scientist split his soul and the machine is observant, it can learn from each of the Stitchpunks as it gains each new part of the complete soul, until it is fully complete. So the Stitchpunks were never made to survive. But what do you think? What was the scientist's plan? I just finished watching Paranorman for the first time since I was younger, and there's one thing I haven't seen too many others talk about. Something that completely changes how the witch's curse works, and how Norman even got his gift. But before we start waking up the dead and talking to ghosts, hit that subscribe button. It's free, and I promise it won't curse you like it did these zombies. In Paranorman, we meet Norman, a young boy who's outcasted by the town and looked at as strange, even by his own family. Because Norman isn't normal. He has the gift to talk to ghosts and the undead. But Norman isn't the only one in his family with this special gift. Norman has a great uncle who lives at the top of the hill by the old graveyard, Mr. Prendergast. And Mr. Prendergast has the same gift that Norman does, and we learn he has been watching Norman from afar, spying on him like some creep for years. And there's a reason for that. You see, every year to keep the witch asleep, someone with the special gift of talking to the undead has to read from a special book. But with Mr. Prendergast getting old, and with Norman now growing up, he has to shift that responsibility of reading from the book to Norman. You see, as Norman gets older, he starts to have these visions of the witch's curse, the past haunting him. And the only one who understands this is Mr. Prendergast. And he pops out of a toilet as a ghost after he unfortunately passes away, and tells Norman exactly what he has to do to prevent the witch's curse. And with my theory of the fact that the previous member has to pass away, it would explain how the gift passes on through generations and how it has to skip. Because why would Norman's family not possess the gift? His sister doesn't, his mom doesn't, and his dad most definitely doesn't have it. But why does Norman? And where did this gift even come from? About 3/4 into the film, we find out what the witch's name was. It's Agatha Prendergast. And if that last name sounds familiar, you'd be right, because that's the same last name as Norman's uncle, meaning that Agatha isn't just some random witch, she's actually Norman's relative from about 300 years ago. And the whole reason Agatha is called a witch in the first place was because she has the same gift as Norman. And unfortunately for Agatha, instead of just being bullied and outcasted by the town, she was put on trial and ultimately killed, being called the witch. A tragic death for an 11-year-old girl who didn't ask for any of this. But if Agatha had the same gift as Norman, how did Mr. Prendergast get it? And who had it before Agatha? When taking a look at the book entrusted to Norman to keep Agatha asleep, he gets confused while trying to read it. Because it isn't just some special book with another curse or even a spell, it's a children's fairy tale, a bedtime story. And going all the way to the end of the film, after Norman talks to Agatha and stops her reign over the town, she explains how she recognizes the tree and how her mother used to read her stories there. And that right there is a very important detail, but it leaves a lot of loose ends. Because if Agatha had the gift and was killed, how did the gift pass on through later generations? And who held the same gift before Agatha? And also the fact on how they knew to read Agatha's stories for the last 300 years. When looking at the gift itself, I made the bold claim about how the previous family member had to die before the next one takes the responsibility of the gift completely over, and how it would make sense as to why the gift seems to skip generations, but I could also be wrong. Because in Agatha's case, if she died before the next person with the gift was born, how did the gift survive? Well, there are a few possibilities. The first possibility is that Agatha is a direct parallel to Norman, meaning she could have a great aunt or great uncle who shared the gift and fully understood her, who kept her calm, who later could have had children who would go on and possess the gift for the next 300 years, eventually leading to Norman and Norman's great uncle. The second possibility is that Agatha's mother goes on to have another child after suffering from the grief of her daughter. The only problem with that theory is that the child wouldn't be old enough to keep Agatha asleep, as they would be too young to talk and even understand her, so it'd have to be someone either the same age or older, and Agatha never mentions having a sibling, so this is less likely. The third possibility is if my theory is right about the skipping generations, then maybe her mother's siblings had children and her mother asked them to read her stories as they passed it on until it reached Norman. The fourth and final one I'll mention, because to be honest they are essentially endless, is that Agatha's mom simply read to her through her grief at Agatha's grave, keeping her asleep by accident, and it would later become a family tradition. Because even though Agatha would be a ghost, it doesn't mean she wouldn't be able to hear her mom or a relative. And I know Agatha stated she hasn't seen her mom since her death, but if she was asleep, this would still make sense. So when or if Agatha's mom had more kids, or even Agatha's family fully took over the tradition, the gift could have came back and kept Agatha asleep up until Norman broke the cycle. And one thing that makes the most sense to me would be a mix of possibility 1 and possibility 4. As looking at Norman and Agatha side by side, they are made out to be direct parallels of one another with key differences. Both Norman and Agatha are 11 years old, and their gift is a burden to them. They are treated like outcasts, bullied, and in Agatha's case, she was ultimately killed. And with the possibility of both Norman and Agatha having an older family member with the same gift, who understands how it is, and how both Norman and Agatha are shown to be treated differently, with the key difference of Agatha seeking revenge to those who hurt her, while Norman always forgave them, and the end of the movie portrays that beautifully. But there is still one problem with this. There wasn't any responsibility to pass on to Agatha that we know of, so if the gift has to pass on generations to pass on the responsibility, what would Agatha's responsibility be, since we know Norman's is to keep Agatha asleep? Well, if we take possibility 4 seriously, then we can make sense of all this mess. Because if Agatha's mother read to her out of pure grief for her child without knowing of someone else possessing the same gift, it may have become the accidental tradition of the rest of the bloodline. And when Agatha's mother passes away, her dying wish would probably be to keep reading to her deceased child. So naturally it gets handed down to the next relative and the next for the next 300 years. And if we circle back to Agatha, she may have even been the first one in the family to talk to ghosts, as she was also the only one to be shown to have other abilities like lightning and even raising the dead. So what if when she cursed the townspeople to make them pay, that curse also caused her gift to be passed on until someone breaks the cycle? And that's why Norman has the gift, and even why his ancestors do, and why Norman breaks the curse. But if he broke the curse, why can Norman still see ghosts? Because even though the gift was tied to the curse itself, it doesn't just simply disappear. Because when Agatha had it, she had no responsibilities connected to it. So maybe it can still keep going through the next generations, or it could even stop with Norman himself. And when he eventually has kids and passes himself, the gift is gone forever. So what if Agatha was the beginning of the gift, her mom started a tradition, and Agatha's curse caused the birth of the gift through her bloodline, and Norman finally ended that 300-year curse? But I want to know, what do you think kept this gift alive for the last 300 years? Jack Skellington was never a human. After watching A Nightmare Before Christmas, some things have been on my mind that were never answered on screen. Like who Jack was before he was the Pumpkin King of Halloween, and why those doors exist to get to the other holidays, and even how Jack returns back to Halloween Town after visiting Christmas for the very first time. And after sitting with this movie for a bit and some thinking time, I have some theories to answer my questions. But before we go bring Halloween a little bit too early this year, hit that subscribe button. I promise it won't scare you. In The Nightmare Before Christmas, we go through a story about Jack Skellington's battle with boredom surrounding his holiday, Halloween, a sort of existential crisis. And at the beginning of the film, after singing, he wanders off walking aimlessly, and he ends up finding a circle of trees, each of which having a separate holiday, like Thanksgiving, St. Patrick's Day, Easter, Valentine's Day, and Christmas. But there's one thing about that bothers me. The movie makes it out to be that there is no knowledge of these doors. I mean, it takes Jack completely by surprise, and clearly this place he ends up isn't part of his home Halloween town. As looking at the opening scene of the film with the narrator, We see that Halloween also has its very own door on one of these trees. But where is this place? Because Jack was simply able to just walk so far and make it to this place somehow. And that's strange to me because why is Jack able to do so? After Jack opens the Christmas door and is sucked in through the tree, and on the other side he doesn't just exit another door. He is placed on top of a hill, looking down at Christmasland. And after he becomes obsessed with it, he makes his way home to tell everyone about it. But how? After doing some research and looking at certain details about the lore separated from the film inside the books The Battle for the Pumpkin King and Long Live the Pumpkin Queen, we can come to understand that the place Jack wandered off to is called the Hinterlands, a sort of neutral dimension between worlds. In the books, they also say that hinterlands actually are on the outskirts of each holiday, so now we have an idea of how that works, but there is still the question as to why it exists. Towards the end of the film, when Jack tells the town about his plan to take over Christmas and making it his own, we learn he isn't the only person who could go to the other holidays, as Locke, Shock, and Barrel are sent out by Jack to capture Santa. They were also able to access the hinterlands as well as after Santa was captured the second time around since the first time they captured the Easter Bunny, Jack's plan is in full effect to fully take over Christmas. And as Christmas Eve rolls around, Jack then travels to the real world. And here is where we have another issue. Well, two I should say. First is after Jack goes around handing out the scariest gifts, traumatizing kids around the city, there's one thing I noticed. The fact that while Jack is handing out all these freakish toys, no one is shocked that Santa exists. Instead, they label Jack as an imposter, and it goes so far that the military gets involved, shooting Jack down. And that stands out to me because it changes how holidays work within that world than it would for, say, our own reality. Because it opens up the fact that the embodiment of holidays are actually real, not just holiday spirit. Instead, holidays in the city are physical, so Santa coming down a chimney, the Easter Bunny laying eggs, the turkey of Thanksgiving are all real. And the second issue I have is how Jack got home. But going back to the doors and hinterlands, I think because the town knows the holidays exist or even created them, it allows all the holidays to traverse through these dimensions to the real world and through each other's holidays. But what about Jack not being a human? Well, if we take what I said about the town creating the holidays, then things get a little bit interesting. Because yes, people have made theories about Jack being a human before, or even him being from other films, starting at Frankenweenie, then Corpse Bride, to finally A Nightmare Before Christmas. But I don't think Jack was ever a human, nor anyone in Halloween Town for that matter. As Jack goes to Christmasland, he is shocked and surprised and excited by the idea of a different holiday. But if he was once a human, why wouldn't he remember Christmas or Easter or any other holiday for that matter? So what if because the town, hinterlands, and the holidays are all real, as we now know the town isn't shocked that Santa is real, what if the town and or the world created Jack, Santa, the Easter Bunny, and since this isn't a normal world, the hinterlands were created as a byproduct of each holiday, kind of like a calendar in a sense, as we have each of those holidays once a year. That's why they were found together in a circle of trees, and with the town's belief in the holidays, Jack and the other holidays are able to travel through the dimensions at will. Because of the barrier, it wouldn't have to be so strong, only strong enough to keep the humans out. It would also explain the portal in the real world, as when Jack was shot down and landed in the graveyard, he used it as a gateway to get home. Because with Halloween, the thoughts would be on the dead, the scary things, enabling passageways like that to exist. So with the truth about the hinterlands, Jack being shocked about the other holidays, and portals around the world, I believe that Jack was never a human. Instead, he was made by the world to be the embodiment of Halloween. Because it's so odd how normal the town reacts to Santa Claus as if they knew he was real. So I can only imagine how Halloween is if all the Halloween town enters the human realm. But what do you think about Jack Skellington? Was he a human? Or was he just the perfect embodiment of Halloween? I have never seen a movie as obsessed with spoiled milk, otherwise known as cheese, like the Box Trolls. From their home cheese bridge to royal eating cheese instead of funding schools, this cheese seems to be hiding something very sinister. But before we go searching through this dairy delicacy, hit that subscribe button, or you may just end up like this guy the next time you eat cheese. For those unfamiliar with the Box Trolls, it was a movie released in 2014 and was loosely based on a book made by Alan Snow called Here Be Monsters, a novel around 544 pages, and I'm gonna be completely honest, I didn't read it. But with some research, it's about a boy named Arthur, an orphan who finds a town above called Ratridge, which, since the film is loosely based off of it, we are talking about a town in our film called Cheesebridge. Anyway, Arthur ventures out and finds and befriends Box Trolls and Cabbage Head, and they go on to defeat Snatcher and his Cheese Guild. And just like our film, we also have our very own Snatcher, and our story revolves around cheese itself. And of course, we couldn't forget our very own little Box Trolls living beneath Cheesebridge. And in the film, we go through the journey of Eggs, otherwise known to the town as the stolen or even eaten baby, the Trubshaw baby, who was raised by these trolls underneath Cheesebridge. The reason for that being because 11 years ago, Snatcher actually kidnapped his father to build a machine to kill the Box Trolls that we actually see by the end of the film. And Eggs was given to these Box Trolls by his dad to make sure his kid was safe. But Snatcher used this as an opportunity to devise a plan to gain power. Power he desperately craved because he wanted a white hat and earn his spot into the cheese room. See, these white hats symbolize wealth and political status, shown to us by Winnie, the little girl who helps Eggs and the Box Trolls' dad, who is a part of this cheese room, where they actually ignore school funding and other important measures to indulge in their addiction of cheese. Which actually brings me to my first point about this strange cheese-addicted town. Because what actually is this cheese? See, when I was doing some research into the movie and even in our very own history on cheese, I found a lot of interesting facts around the Victorian era, which our movie closely resembles as it's placed in a fictional European town called Narvinia. Going back to the facts, did you know that Queen Victoria herself actually got gifted a half wheel of cheese weighing around 1,000 pounds as a wedding present in 1840? And we even had a cheese bank in Italy around the Emilia Romagna region, sorry if I botched that pronunciation, but cheese has been a symbol of wealth and status in our own world. It was even used as currency to pay debts and even seen as collateral for some banks and some people. So cheese definitely holds some secret treasures, most likely some moldy ones. See, I believe that cheese we experience in the Box Trolls isn't normal, not like the cheese we eat depending on who you are on a day-to-day basis. No, I think this dairy delicacy is actually a form of, well, a drug. I think this town is so addicted to cheese, so much so that it is no longer just normal cheese, instead, it is now a drug. But let me explain. See, with everything we know from our very own history, it being used as a currency, collateral, wealth symbols, it makes sense that the town of Cheesebridge treats it the way they do. I mean, cheese is even in its name. And if we think about our main villain Snatcher, we know a couple things about him and his relationship with this cheese. See, Snatcher is obsessed with not only the white hat, but what comes with getting one. And that obviously being entering the cheese room and partaking in the highest form of wealth, cheese. And if someone could tell me how many times I say the word cheese throughout this video, I'll give them a cookie down below in the comments. Anyway, but there's one thing about Snatcher and cheese that doesn't involve his goals. Snatcher is actually deathly allergic to it, to the point he puffs up and even hallucinates and almost actually takes out one of his goons after having the tiniest portion of cheese, showing just how much this cheese holds value to the people in this town, that even risking death itself is almost justifiable. And I don't know about you guys, but that is definitely not normal. And the thing is, it isn't even just him. Yes, our goons don't seem to share the same addiction to cheese like he does, but the people who most definitely do are these white hats. And if I'm being completely honest, these people are slightly worse than Snatcher himself, as when faced with actual issues they are supposed to be discussing in this cheese room, they are, instead of actually addressing them, they buy more cheese with the funds meant for other things, probably like healthcare and new schools. And they even use the anniversary started by Snatcher himself of the disappearance of the Trubshaw baby, that being Eggs, as a way to divert the attention of these issues and blame it all on the Box Trolls for the misfortune bestowed upon the town. And mind you, this is all over some cheese. So whatever the dairy controllers are doing to this cheese, it has everybody hooked. I mean, even at the end of the movie, 3 of the White Hats chased down a wheel of cheese that went all the way down to the sea or ocean surrounding the town and retrieved it. They simply just could not let it go. And side note, I don't entirely blame them, as cheese wheels of that caliber would probably be worth some decent Gouda. Sorry for that terrible cheese joke. Anyway, see, the more you actually really look at this town and its cheese obsession, the more you realize this cheese is actually used not only as a strange addiction, but also a form of control, a way to keep status and hold people beneath them, to treat them like peasants. And again, Snatcher is the perfect example of this. But even looking at background characters and those that were at the play, we can assume that some or even a large portion of these people can't even afford to buy a singular cheese slice on a regular basis, implying that just like in any society, that there are several classes of social status, with these white hats sitting at the very top. And in my eyes, these kingpins control the supply. See, not only do they cut funding to continue to enjoy their moldy treasures, but they also, more or less, are responsible for the supply of this dairy around their town. And with their fine dining, it appears as though this town will function kind of how it actually looks in the film. See, when looking at Cheesebridge itself, it is actually built like a spiral where the rich live at the top and the less fortunate are most likely at the bottom. But we also have another class, the box trolls themselves. I'm not quite sure what these creatures are, for all we know they could definitely be a human that evolved in a different way, due to their circumstances. And I feel as though this is probably the most probable, because as when thinking of these classes in their society, box trolls would be considered to be at the very bottom of the barrel. They live in the sewage system beneath Cheesebridge and scavenge for food and other knickknacks at night when the rest of the town is asleep. Not only that, but despite their awful depiction made by Snatcher, these box trolls are definitely highly intelligent. Well, maybe not all. But what if because the White Hats kept cutting funds and progressed their obsessed endeavors of their dairy delicacy, the lowest form of people in town succumbed to have to be scavengers, and over time, as Cheesebridge grew, these humans evolved into the box trolls we know and love today. See, what I'm getting at is this film, behind its funky style and goofiness, actually depicts what it would be like to live in this type of society perfectly. And behind all the bright colors and the story itself, cheese is the ultimate factor that is ruling this town. And unfortunately for our box trolls, they got placed right in the middle of this. As people became more stressed and less fortunate, the box trolls are ultimately put to blame. Never the White Hats, or even to be more specific, Winnie's dad, as they are so obsessed with cheese, their addiction trumps all in a very unfortunate way, which is exactly why this moldy milk, in my eyes, is almost like a drug that's got everyone in this town hooked forever, to the point of everything, including their own lives, are worth far less than some cheese wheels. But what do you think? Is cheese really this sinister? Monster House isn't really about a haunted house. It's about a man who turned himself into a monster, and a neighborhood that made sure he could never stop being one. On the surface, the movie is simple. Creepy old man, an alive house, and kids trying to survive Halloween. But the story doesn't actually start when the house comes alive. It starts with Nebercracker. Because before anything supernatural even happens, he's already the villain in everyone's eyes. And that's not an accident. When the movie finally explains what happened to Constance, everything changes. She isn't just some ghost. She's the reason the house exists in the first place. She dies in that foundation, and her spirit becomes the house. That's when Nebercracker realized something no one else does. The house isn't dangerous, it's alive. So he has a choice. Tell people the truth and sound insane, or make sure no one ever gets close enough to find out. So he picks the only thing that actually works: fear. He yells at kids, he chases people off, he builds a reputation on purpose. Not because he's evil, because if people stay away, they stay alive. He turns himself into the warning sign. This is where the movie quietly shifts, because now the neighborhood takes over the role. They don't question him. They don't try to understand him. They turn him into a story, a warning, a rumor. And once that happens, everything he does just reinforces it. If he yells, he's dangerous. If he isolates, he's hiding something. If he protects the house, that must mean something worse is inside. No one ever considers that he's just doing it for them. So now he's stuck. He's not just acting like a monster anymore. That's all anyone sees. And the thing he's protecting actually is a monster, but not in the way people think. The house isn't random. It's built from grief, from what happened to Constance, from something that never got resolved. That's why it feels so aggressive. The house is basically everything Nevercracker couldn't let go of. So now we've got both sides locked in. Nevercracker has to keep people away, and the neighborhood already believes he's dangerous, and the house makes sure the threat is real. There's no way out of that, because even if he stopped, even if he tried to explain, no one would believe him. He did his job too well. He became the monster, and everyone made sure it stayed that way. So yeah, Monster House is about a haunted house, but that's not where the story really begins. It begins with a man trying to protect people the only way he knew how, in a neighborhood that never really looked past what they were afraid of. Because in the end, he became the villain to protect them, and they made sure he could never be anything else. And the house? That wasn't the start of the problem. It was what was left after everything else had already gone wrong. Lost Ollie, one of the greatest limited series shows to ever hit the stage on Netflix, about a boy named Billy and his lost best friend Ollie. One wild adventure that will definitely pull at your heartstrings. But even after I shed some tears, there was a lot of questions I began to ask myself that were left unanswered. So today I have some theories about our new best friend. But before we go trusting everyone, hit that subscribe button, as you never know who truly you can call a friend. Before we fully immerse ourselves within my wild and wacky ideas, I want to recap the full story start to finish from the first episode to the very last, so we all can refresh our memories or even get to know what I'm about to talk about. Because trust me, every moment in this show plays a crucial role in the theories we're about to get into, so pay close attention as the video goes on. So without wasting any more time, let's start at the very beginning of our adventure. See, Lost Ollie was released back in August of 2022 and was created by Shannon Tyndall, who based our story off the children's book written by William Joyce called Ollie Odyssey, both following a boy named Billy and a stuffed friend named Ollie, and other characters that will be introduced as I go on. In episode 1, we start off with a shot of Ollie laying in a puddle and a bell on a branch and his chest wide open. We hear Ollie ask Billy how long they have been friends, and Billy replies since forever. And Ollie also asks Billy to never forget him, no matter what. Ollie then wakes up in a box calling out for Billy, and we overhear a conversation of the woman buying things, including the box that Ollie is inside. She then opens the box and takes a hard look at Ollie, calling him handsome, and picks him up, ringing a bell with inside him, and it appears as though she can't hear him as he tries to talk. And then she stabs a price tag right through his ear and carries him to a shelf for him to be displayed and eventually bought. Ollie, thinking of Billy, then gets up and starts trying to find his escape, where a little girl spots him and asks him what his name is. He says Ollie, and that he's trying to find Billy, and she proceeds to ask him what his last name is and if he remembers where he lives, which Ollie can't remember. The girl explains it's her birthday and that he should go with her, but he says that he can't because he has to find his Billy, who could be out there looking for him. She then leaves and Ollie makes a dash towards the store door before it is locked by the owner. But he gets snagged and it seems like the woman didn't notice that Ollie has moved at all and goes to watch some TV with her dog Buttons. Ollie is then able to rip the price tag off, setting himself free, knocking down the pencils with him in the process. He then trips over one, sending a star from his front pouch, flying. He gets it back, and after looking at it again, he has flashes of some memories with Billy and his family. We see him and Billy playing pirates, where Billy says as long as these stars are near each other, they shall never be part. Buttons is then behind Ollie, showing that dogs can see toys moving as well. Then, a clown emerges from the other end of the table, catching Ollie and Buttons' attention, and he taunts the dog, where he ends up in its jaws. Ollie then distracts the dog, making it drop the clown, and the store owner calls Buttons back upstairs. The clown then very creepily fixes himself, and we learn that his name is Zozo. He then leads Ollie to his hideout within the clothing rack. Zozo also notices that Ollie has a hole on his side, where he puts a sticker of Elvis, sealing it shut. Zozo also tells Ollie that his name means Peacebringer, which will be very important to our theories later. Ollie then explains that he is lost and that he can't remember much, only being in the box, it moving, and now him being within the store, and how he needs to find Billy. We then get another flashback, and Billy's dad is now home, and he gets mad at Billy for making a mess because his mother is sick and can't deal with it. And he tells Billy he needs to grow up and be tough and stop acting like a baby. Where Billy's mom comes in and tells his dad he is just trying to have an adventure, and they both end up joining in on Billy's game. His mom then takes Billy to his room, where she tells him that his dad has a lot on his mind and how he used to play with this army doll when he was little, and how he saw his dog Princess sitting on it. But Princess was so old that she couldn't hear him telling her to move. So he was going to nudge her with his foot, but Princess got up and his toe ended up, well, in her behind. Yikes. And to make it even worse, when he removed his toe, she proceeded to let it all out over this toy. Billy's mom then spots a mark on his arm and asks him what it is. He then explains that his bully tried to make him say that his mother and father aren't actually his mom and dad, implying that he was adopted. And he promises his mom that he didn't say it no matter how hard the bully twisted his arm. And she tells him that he needs to stand up for himself sometimes. She then tells Billy a story about the origin of the stars and how the pure of heart could only wield them, asking Billy if him and Ollie are indeed worthy. Both Billy and his mom then say "Ti amo," which means "I love you," and we see Ollie oversee Billy's dad, watching them happily. We then cut back to Ollie, and he remembers things from Billy's memory wall. Ollie then grabs crayons and some paper and proceeds to draw, and Zozo puts it all together since he recognizes some of the things Ollie drew, and they form it into a map. Ollie then asks Zozo if he would come with, which at first he doesn't, and Ollie asks if he has someone he loves, striking a chord, and Zozo replies that she is gone, and he apologizes for getting upset. And he says how he loved her so much, and when he lost her, he searched everywhere, yet he couldn't find her. Her name was Nina. And Zozo then says they should stay there as they can't trust the world. But Ollie tells him that he can trust him, doing enough convincing to form a way out. And they try to use the doggy door, but it's too heavy for them to push. So they end up waiting until the dog comes back in from going outside, and they use the candy cane to hold the door open, and they head out. But Ollie notices something wrong. He dropped a star, and won't continue without it. So Zozo goes and grabs it, but is snatched up by the dog. But Ollie pulls him away, and they continue to try and evade the dog, but it catches up when Zozo's leg pops out of the socket. Out of nowhere, a teddy bear comes out with 2 swords and stabs it in its nose, sending it on its way. Her name is Rosie. She was actually a friend of Zozo, and he says, "You followed me even though I told you not to." And he sends Ollie to go find some patients, as he asks Zozo and Rosie if they were once boyfriend and girlfriend. Ollie then hears a noise which he seems to remember and runs toward it, and he gets excited as he found the dark river, and we get a shot of all 3 of them standing there staring at it. As our first episode now comes to a close, and we see Billy running in the woods, now in a suit, calling out for Ollie. Episode 2 picks up with Billy in his bed wearing that same suit we saw at the end of episode 1, and he grabs markers and papers and rides his bike into town, putting up posters everywhere showing him searching for Ollie. We then see Ollie, Zozo, and Rosie running toward the boat, and Rosie proceeds to trip him, showing a sign of jealousy, which becomes important later as she leaves him behind. When Ollie catches up, he calls her out and she claims she did nothing, and she wants her and Zozo to be together like they were before, making fun of Ollie's map in the process, again showing that jealousy. And Zozo gets mad at Rosie and goes on to find Ollie, encouraging his journey and tells him they should all head up to the roof to help find the next place. And he makes it into a pirate game, handing Ollie one of Rosie's swords, and Rosie and Ollie race to get to the roof first, where Rosie then trips Ollie again, sending his star flying. He catches it, and both Ollie and Zozo get mad at her, and she climbs away. Ollie gets another memory, this time at the dinner table, and it's not a good one. As Billy's mom receives a phone call with not so good news, as the hospital is calling for her to go back in and get some more tests done, which they say can't wait. We come back to Ollie, and he tells Zozo that something is wrong with Mama. Rosie, still pouting about Zozo favoring Ollie, actually spots the white tower on the map, but didn't tell them. Zozo and Ollie then also see it, and they realize that she didn't tell them. Ollie then jumps into a small boat passing by, and they all reach the shore. And Ollie finds a biker with a bag, and they ride it into the city, where Ollie's memories are coming faster, as this one he has is of him, Billy, and Billy's mom, all singing while they were in the car. But then she goes quiet. And we hear hospital beats. Billy then tells her to continue singing, which she does, ending our memory. Ollie and the other two then reach the hospital, and they head inside, passing by nurses and doctors which don't see them, where Ollie then gets a memory of them in the hospital in the very same hall where a little girl is, and she seems to be able to see them. Ollie then stops, and we see a mural, one from his memory of being there. They keep going, and then they reach a room with an MRI machine, where we get a memory of him and Billy staring at it, and his mom is now in a blue hospital gown. And they start to sing the song, All I Have to Do Is Dream by the Everly Brothers, and Ollie also starts to sing it, which Zozo notices and asks him where he heard that song before. And then they all head up to the roof, and they spot a train, the same one that is on the map. They then get to the train, and they try to get on it, Ollie helping Rosie get on, letting her grab onto his ears, and their relationship seems to be getting better, as the sticker Zozo gave him in the first episode isn't holding, so she gives him some thread and needle and a piece of her ribbon, explaining how Zozo was the one who fixed her up. We then see Billy biking, and he goes inside Zeke's 5, a bar, and he goes up to ask if he could put a sign in the sign window by the door, and he says he won't leave if it's not in there, where he then is told to ask the owner, who then tells him if he can get the ball in the corner pocket, he could put it in. And Billy makes it, and he's now able to put his sign in there, leaving happily. It then goes back to our gang, and Ollie recognizes something in the woods, proceeding to jump off, and the other two following. And he continues into the woods, and it's now dark. They then spot something Ollie calls the troll, and Rosie rushes in to start attacking it, where they find out it's just made of wood. They then climb up top, and Zozo asks Ollie what the black spot is on the map, but Ollie can't remember. Zozo then points Ollie to an amusement park in the distance, suggesting that they should go there, and then they head out. In their travels, Ollie spots a school sign, and he remembers him and Billy walking to school, and he says they are close, but can't guarantee it. Zozo says they can keep chasing a feeling or go to where they decided, so they continue. They arrive at the amusement park, and it's all run down and abandoned. It's called Dreamland. Zozo seems very familiar with this place, and he turns the lights on. And this is where our story takes a very dark and interesting turn, as they head toward an old sign named Bali High, where Zozo asks Ollie if he remembers anything, which Ollie doesn't, and Zozo then starts singing the dream song, where Ollie then gets another memory where Billy's mom decides she doesn't want to do chemo, as she wants it to be on her own terms, knowing her time is near. Billy overhears this and calls his mom, where she sings the dream song once again. Zozo then asks Ollie if he remembered anything about this place, and Ollie tells him he doesn't know. All he knows is that his mama is sick, and he has to get to Billy. Zozo, now angry, saying it's his turn for answers, as he explains to Ollie how he is connected to the one he lost, Nina, because the bell that rings inside Ollie is the same one that he heard from Nina. Zozo thinks Ollie took Nina and did something very bad to her, where he grabs Ollie, making Ollie drop the star. And the episode ends with Billy in the woods looking at that wooden troll, spotting Dreamland in the distance. Episode 3 picks up in 1965. Dreamland is alive and people are enjoying themselves. We then see Zozo, and he is part of a game where the goal is to try and knock him down. And we start to hear a familiar bell, the same one that calls from Ollie, now coming from the stand across from his, Bali High. And if you notice, it's the same place that Zozo took Ollie before he showed his true colors. In the stand, a doll performs, Nina, and she dances majestically, captivating Zozo along with a little girl who plays a major role within this flashback. Zozo then proceeds to play his guitar, and it's enough to catch her attention. But someone new steps to Zozo's stand and knocks him down over and over again until it cuts to black. And then we arrive back, this time at night, and Bali High's stand is empty. Zozo's looking sad. The bell rings and Nina comes across to Zozo's stand, and they dance even though Zozo has no legs yet, and the dream song plays in the background. 1970, an auction is being held for the items from Dreamland, as it's now coming to a close. The little girl is back, this time with her piggy bank. They announce a real treasure, an authentic genuine Balinese doll with bells, Nina. Zozo, now in distress as his lover is now being auctioned away, tries to free himself. The little girl bids, and right as she's about to be outbid, her father seals the deal and Nina is sold to the girl, taking Nina away from Zozo. And as they walk past the old Bali High stand, Nina sends a piece of herself towards Zozo, but it flew past, and they go and drive off. Zozo now left alone. The seasons change around Zozo and the park becomes more deserted, the Bali High stand now decayed. The piece that Nina let go then comes back close to Zozo once again, and then his stand falls apart. The piece of Nina landing on a pair of legs, which Zozo uses his guitar string and needles, giving himself the ability to walk. Zozo then heads off in search for his love, where he finds a teddy bear at the very edge of its life at a drive-in movie theater. He then stitches her up, this being Rosie. Together, Rosie and Zozo continue the search for Nina, and she gains a new arm and a new leg as time goes on. Rosie then draws a portrait of Nina for them to use and aid their search, and they continue on to have no luck until they end up outside a store, where a rhino plushie seems to recognize the drawing. It wasn't her. Zozo, overcome by his anger and frustration, then goes on to destroy the rhino, ripping out its stuffing. Rosie watching, traumatized by what just happened. So Zozo leaves Rosie a note as he knows he's becoming something he doesn't want to be, and heads to the thrift shop we first met him in, where he sits on the shelf as time moves past. Rosie finds him and we see him dragging a cup with a design of a Balinese doll on it, and she reads his note. Zozo stays here until the day he hears Nina's bell, coming from Ollie. We come back to the present day, and Zozo has Ollie tied up, throwing rocks at him, asking him where he got Nina's bell. Ollie tries to reason with Zozo, but all his reasoning has left, and he doesn't believe Ollie when he tries to tell him that he doesn't know where Nina is. Zozo then grabs a needle and is about to start cutting Ollie open. Rosie then stops him and tells Zozo to take a walk, as she will try to get the answer out of him. We then see Billy's dad asleep on a chair, where he wakes up and we see that there is a photo of Billy's mom on the table with sandwiches and other food around it, implying that she passed away. He then calls for Billy, but he isn't home. He then rushes out into the storm, yelling for him, and we now see Billy at the gate of Dreamland, inside the rain. We cut back to Rosie and Ollie, and she explains how Zozo wasn't always horrible, and how she still loves him even now that he is swallowed by his pain. Rosie then gives Ollie his star back, and Ollie tells Rosie his favorite memory, a snow day, and we see him, Billy, and his parents all playing out in the snow, laughing and enjoying themselves. Rosie then decides to set Ollie free, giving him his map back, and Ollie remembers the sign that he saw in the woods, this time knowing it leads to Billy's school, which is the black spot on his map. Rosie distracts Zozo, explaining how he isn't alone and that she is here for him and that she loves him. Zozo, too absorbed by his sorrows, ignores her and asks where Ollie is, realizing that she is distracting her as the tunnel of love turns on and he sees Ollie tossing Rosie aside, running toward him. Zozo catches up and the swan goes off the track as there's debris blocking the way, and then we see Billy at another gate of Dreamland. This time a truck spots him and he runs away. Zozo is then in the swan and Ollie tries not to slip off of the swan's head. Rosie then comes back and attacks Zozo, but he grabs her sword and stabs her and he throws her off. The swan then crashes and Ollie is sent flying into the river. Episode 4 starts with flashes of memories and them singing the dream song. Ollie then reaches the shore and walks back to the sign and heads inside the school. It's dark and empty. Ollie makes it to Billy's classroom and he has a memory of the class doing a show and tell, and the kid behind Billy is his bully, Mike Apple. Billy is then asked to present and he shares Ollie with the rest of his class, and he tells the class about their adventures and them being pirates, and the class joins in. But the bully laughs, mocking him, and the little girl tells the bully to shut up and that he is stupid. Ollie then heads out into the hall and he gets another memory, where the bully taunts Billy, taking Ollie and tossing him outside, and Billy proceeds to do something that changes everything. He leaves Ollie outside, proceeding to say, "I ain't no baby," an option that Billy makes that he will soon come to regret. Ollie in present day then heads outside, sad because Billy left him, and he throws away his star. Billy, still in the rain by Dreamland, is approached by the truck again, and it's Mr. Rhodes, one of the guys from the bar, and he takes Billy with him. We then see Billy's dad searching for him, stopping at the diesel pump where Billy put up one of his signs. And then we see the bully kicking things and he also finds one of Billy's missing posters. And then he sees Billy and Mr. Rhodes pull up and head into the bar. He follows Billy inside, taunting him once again, and they both grab pool sticks and they start to fight until the bully corners Billy on a machine and rips the corsage Billy has. And Billy, no longer afraid, whacks the bully where the sun don't shine. And Billy's ready to pounce on him, but his dad shows up and they leave heading home. We then see Ollie staring at the night sky, remembering Mama's story about them, and he searches for the star, holding it very tight. He gets another memory. We see them all in the hospital and Mama is singing. Ollie then goes to the table next to her and she calls out for him, showing that she can see him move, which is very interesting. And she tells Ollie something to pass on to Billy and his dad, and they both start singing the dream song once again. Ollie then sees a star in the sky and he remembers what he is made for, and he takes off running back toward the school sign and even further. Billy and his father get home, and he doesn't get mad at Billy. Instead, he tells him how he is tougher than he ever was, and that just because you can be tough doesn't mean you can't cry. And he tells Billy that they have to go inside the house, but he can't do it alone. And they then leave the light on outside for Ollie as they head inside. Ollie stares at the decayed and withered home. He is too late. They're gone. Ollie heads inside anyway, flashes of what this place once was, and it's now empty and dark. He heads into Billy's room, climbing onto his bed, and he sees the missing posters Billy made, now knowing Billy was looking for him too. And then he stares at the memory wall, apologizing for missing everything. We then see a photo of that little girl with Nina. A flashback happens and Billy is even younger than is shown, where he asks why he doesn't look like his mom, which she replies, "Do you look like Ollie?" And he laughs. And she says, "You love him, don't you?" And he does with all his heart. She then explains Ollie's origins, where she built him out of his dad's stinky shirt and her dress and more things, but he needed a heart, and she gave him the one from her very best friend, Nina, who was loved so much until she fell apart. We then cut back to Ollie, but Zozo's behind him. His eye is now missing and he asks what he has done to Nina. Ollie runs but trips and Zozo catches Ollie and starts punching him. Ollie then tells Zozo that Nina fell apart after being loved so much and Mama couldn't let her go, so she placed a part of her inside of Ollie, and Zozo cries. Ollie then tells Zozo that he can take the bell as he understands his pain. Zozo gives him a hug, but he rips Ollie apart, grabbing the bell, and then Rosie comes back, saving Ollie, and she collapses, both her and Zozo flowing away, Ollie laying in the puddle with the bell on a stick. A truck approaches and a man gets out, picking Ollie up. He drives into his driveway where we see the house and a new one beside it. He washes Ollie and stitches him back up, and we see a photo of Billy and his parents on the fridge. And he goes into his daughter's bedroom, and it's Billy with his daughter, and his daughter is the one who we saw at the beginning of our story. She then shows Ollie her memory wall just like Billy had, and she starts to sing the dream song and says Ollie has to tell Billy something that his mother told him. You can be sad, but don't grow bigger. You can be mad, but not with each other. And just because you lose someone doesn't mean that they are gone. Billy then places the star over Ollie, and the two stars finally connect. The three of them then go outside and play, ending Ollie's long journey back home. Okay, now that we took our roller coaster of emotions, it's time for me to speak about these theories I have about our new best friend Ollie, like who Nina is, why kids can see the toys but parents can't, unless in Billy's mom's case they are near death, why Billy and Zozo are in my eyes perfect parallels, and even the hidden truth about Rosie. So let's start with the mystery of the missing years. See, if we start from the very beginning in episode 1 of Lost Ollie, he starts his journey off in a thrift shop with no memories, just the fact that he needs to find Billy. The only thing is, how did Ollie even end up there? Yes, he was bought by the store owner, but from the moment Billy leaves him outside to him being unboxed in the shop has a bunch of missing years, as we know years have passed as Billy is all grown up in the very end. But what about the events that are in that time that are left unexplained? See, Billy puts up signs for Ollie that same night he left him at the school, and he's still wearing that same suit he was in class. So surely someone would have found Ollie and recognized him from the signs, right? And if we remember Ollie being left at the school, it's also very possible another kid went and took him. And I have an idea as to who that kid is. See, the only person who wouldn't give Ollie back to Billy would be his bully, Mike Apple. He is the one who threw Ollie outside, and he is the only one to tease Billy about Ollie. So it's very possible he took it, hiding Ollie from Billy for all these years. And you might be saying, I thought it was an old guy who gave the box to the pawn shop. And yeah, you're right, it was, but it was never shown to who that guy ends up being. So thinking more about it, that person could be Mike's dad, pawning off things left in his house by his son, because not only is Ollie in that box, but beside him is also a baseball. And when you think of a dad and a son, especially in TV shows, they always play catch. And if we take a look at what Mike is wearing in our show, it has a mascot on it that could be easily associated with football and/or baseball. So it leads me to believe that in his jealousy and bullying of Billy, he took it away for years, and it helps us fill in the gaps of what happened to Ollie. But this is only one piece of our show full of unexplained ideas, like who Nina really is. Because Nina, I can assure you, isn't normal. When looking at what Nina is, she is a Balinese performance doll, and taking a dive into some actual Balinese mythology, Nina can easily be linked to something bigger than just a regular doll. If you remember when Nina was first auctioned away, she let a piece of herself go. That very piece flew past Zozo, but after what seemed to be years, as everything around Zozo's stand and including his own is more decayed, it comes back, and when it does, Zozo's stand falls apart and it lands on a pair of legs, enabling Zozo to sew himself with them and start to walk. So this piece of Nina acts like a form of divine intervention. In Balinese belief, Niskala, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, that can be a sacred object that can also be associated with an invisible spiritual energy and influence the mortal world. So Nina literally left a spark of her divineness, or a blessing of movement, in Dreamland for Zozo. Why it took years, it seems, to cause the intervention, I believe is because of divine timing, which we will get into more in depth in a moment. For more evidence as to why Nina could be a secret deity, we can also focus on the one thing Zozo recognizes her for: the bell. See, in many Asian folklore traditions, a small grass bell, genta, sorry if I also butchered that, is a sacred tool used by priests to summon gods and clear any negative energy and bridge the physical and spiritual worlds. But why does this relate to Nina? Well, when Nina fell apart during Billy's mom's childhood, and when she put that bell in place for Ollie's heart, it passed on that spiritual protectiveness and lovingness into him, which is why Ollie is uniquely pure and is so caring to the point of even self-sacrifice as he carries the heart of Nina, the goddess of protectiveness. As that is even shown why he needs to get back to Billy and his family, as to be there to protect them from trouble and sorrow. Also in Balinese culture, there are things called silly dolls. Sorry if that was butchered, and I'm sorry in advance if this is also butchered. These dolls also represent Dewi Sri, who is the goddess of fertility, family, and prosperity, and if we think about who Nina is given to, that being Billy's mom, and her becoming a mother, Nina becomes a generational guardian, further solidifying the protection we talked about earlier. And if Nina is a deity, then Zozo is much darker as he becomes obsessed with Nina's physical form rather than what she represented in love. He tears other toys apart, causing chaos he knew wasn't right, even ignoring Rosie, who I believe is connected to Nina in a way, which we will touch on later, and rips Ollie open, claiming the heart he worships, but he meets a fatal end before he can take it, because it symbolizes how darkness won't win in the very end. And Nina may just indirectly explain why kids can see our toys, but adults can't. See, if we broaden ourselves and think about everything holding on to some sort of soul, including these toys, as it even shows they can feel pain, emotions, and other aspects of life, then everything is connected sort of spiritually in a way. And if we think about the only person to be an adult while speaking to Ollie, that was Billy's mom, the only exception, but she was on her deathbed, closer to the end of life in the spiritual world, and her spirit closer than ever. So considering what I said about Ollie carrying on Nina with her heart inside him, Billy's mom was able to talk to her childhood guardian in an indirect way. See, I don't think Ollie and Nina are the same person. The show explains this, and obviously Ollie is a boy, but the reason kids, I believe, can see these toys, good and or bad, is because one, they have a crazy amount of imagination, and also, kids give these toys life, and they become friends with them, and the toys are made for companionship and love. These toys stay with the child in their adolescence until they grow up, serving like Nina in a way, just maybe on a smaller scale. And a child isn't per se necessarily needed for these toys to live, as they were created regardless, and a perfect example is Rosie. Rosie was beaten, and Zozo fixed her up. Together they formed a companionship in search of Nina. But see, there is something Zozo ignored in his pursuit. Rosie even tries to make him realize it. Rosie is Nina. Let me explain. Some of you may be really confused, and that's okay, as hopefully I can help you understand my logic behind this claim. See, when we run through the events of Zozo, there are key highlights to put in order. He falls in love with Nina, she is auctioned away, but she leaves that divine blessing of movement. He gets legs, and he finds Rosie, fixing her up, and they adventure together. But here's the thing, years have passed and it isn't stated when Nina broke, but that piece she left was definitely intentional. See, remember when I asked the question, why did it take years for the piece to set Zozo up with those legs, and I explained how it was divine timing? Well, the reason he was meant to wait until that moment was to find Rosie. Nina, being a deity, set him in a path to find her again within someone new, Rosie. See, Rosie represents what Nina was. She loves Zozo, and her and Nina are parallels. Nina protects, so does Rosie. Nina softens Zozo, Rosie tries to do the same, and the most important thing is Nina's blessing gave movement, but Rosie helped the movement's purpose. The only downfall and tragedy, which I still believe was struck intentionally, was Rosie ending Zozo's journey, with both flowing down the puddle together in the very end. Because think about it, Ollie could have accepted to go home with that little girl we find out is Billy's daughter, but he didn't. That same divine timing was also for Ollie, as it put him closer to Zozo and Rosie's story, because it follows the story's loop. It closes all the chapters. It started with Nina and Zozo. Zozo finds Rosie, Nina is within Ollie, Ollie has Billy. For Nina to continue her protection, her chapter with Zozo needs a resolve. Its continuation falls within Rosie. Ollie was there to be the catalyst that reconnects Rosie and Zozo, and to close off Nina and Zozo's story, Rosie finishes the one she loves to save Ollie, that same protection symbol we deeply have rooted within our theory. Ollie then makes it back to Billy, closing both his and his mom's chapter. So Rosie isn't Nina physically, but she is the continuation of Nina's resolve with Zozo. And to wrap things up, I want to speak about how Zozo and Billy are perfect parallels. See, both Zozo and Billy lose someone they love. In Billy's case, it's two. Both pursue to find them, Billy's only being Ollie and Zozo being Nina. And we see that Billy almost succumbs to full anger, as when the bully comes to the bar, he is ready to fully continue the fight, but his dad came and intervened. Zozo also came to anger, but it couldn't be stopped. Both are mirrors of each other in a beautiful way. But let me know what you guys think of Lost Ollie. Is Nina truly a god, or is she just a regular doll? What if the amazing digital circus isn't alone? I mean, what if CNA just didn't have one game? What if there was more? When looking at the circus all the way back to the pilot, at the very end of that first episode, we see it slowly zoom out, entering the real world. But isn't it a little strange how tiny their world actually is? The circus is built within this vast void, and something fishy is lurking out there. But what? I just might have a theory that may change this whole idea. But before we go scrambling our way through the void, I want to take a moment to talk about the recent leak situation revolving around episode 9's release. And yes, I'm late, but as I and many others were spoiled on the events that take place in the episode, which was unfortunate, it made me think of something I'd like to share. I think it's still very possible that those leaks that were circulating around the internet weren't entirely real, meaning it could possibly be a fake out, leading all of us down a rabbit hole to a different ending. I mean, this isn't the first time a show creator has done this. Taking inspiration from Alex Hirsch, the creator of Gravity Falls, he did the exact same thing. With the reveal of who wrote the journals within the show, he ended up posting a fake spoiler off a burner account and sparking theorizers to go crazy. So what if episode 9 is doing the same thing? And I know this will turn some heads, but this has been a thought that's been on my mind for the last couple days. But let me know what you guys think, because the only way to truly find out is with the theatrical release of episode 9 tomorrow. So strap in tight, grab your favorite snack, and hit that subscribe button. It might just save you from entering a digital jail. When looking at the void and focusing on the very beginning of the amazing digital circus with its pilot, we learn a lot of key details, like how people even entered the circus, shown through Pomni when she first arrived, trying to rip off a headset that I believe she found through one of CNA's abandoned offices, which I explained deeper in my previous theory I have linked down below, and how she is the only one without true emotional baggage going into this mess. Along with that, we also get a glimpse of something different, the real world. After zooming out of the circus at the very end of the episode, traveling through the void, we end up looking at a lit up screen and a headset behind it. But I want to focus on what happened in between, the void. It's strange for the circus world to feel so big when it's actually so small and takes absolutely no space in that endlessness is extremely odd. And I think that the void is hiding other secrets, almost like the circus isn't entirely alone. Because when you think about a computer, 99% of the time the screen displays games, apps, folders, etc. And considering that the fact that the Amazing Digital Circus is a virtual reality game, it can very well be one singular icon on that screen. But if there's more games in the void, why don't we ever see them? Well, there are a number of possibilities, one being the fact that the players can't access the other games, at least not yet. And when we take a look at Kane, he also says something in the pilot that has some loose ends. When Pomni runs through the exit doors, she finally reaches the void. Kane then gets an alert and says, oh no, someone is venturing into the void. They'll get totally spoiled. And that's interesting considering nothing is truly out there. It's empty. So what does Kane mean when he says this? Kane could be implying he uses that space for his unfinished projects, adventures, or any other wacky idea he had come up with. Or, if we take his words in a separate direction, he's implying abstraction, corruption, their mind becoming broken, rotten, and ultimately spoiled. But why? It doesn't make sense to me why Cain is so protective over this space. If the space is empty, there isn't anything to be spoiled. So what if Cain is trying to prevent something? The characters leaving the game and entering another. But how does that even make sense? Well, when looking at who made Cain and the Amazing Digital Circus, which is CNA, they are a company, one that obviously spent years working on and developing the world we know. And with that, we can assume that they would have worked on more than just one game. Or even if they didn't, they would have more than likely had prototypes, unfinished versions, folders with hundreds of files at the bare minimum. And where would those files be placed on a computer? The desktop, the home screen. And with that leads me to believe that the circus is simply one of these desktop icons. But what about the symbols that are shown flying around in the void? The blue and the red? Well, think about how Pomni reacts to seeing this. She becomes dazed, she's sucked into this type of trance, and I believe it's because she was loading out of the circus, somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. And following back on Cain's spoiled words, there is a direct problem. Characters' avatars are directly tied to the circus, just like Cain states with their bodies being made from their mind files. So that trance-like state that Pomni was in was her getting close to self-deletion, because even though she was loading out of the circus, technically her file was being removed from the circus, making it out of place, and slowly making her spoiled and corrupt, causing her to be lost forever, in something potentially worse than abstraction. But this doesn't mean the other worlds and games can't exist on the same computer, because with CNA making the circus, it would make sense to have more than just one game, since the void seems to be made like a barrier, an untamable gateway, that the characters in our beloved circus can't escape from. And maybe we won't see it revealed in episode 9, but maybe we could potentially see them within future projects, where we enter a world just like the Amazing Digital Circus, and we see a darker light shine upon the company CNA, giving it more history. But what do you think lurks in the void? Jax might be the final villain in the Amazing Digital Circus, because behind his lovable bully charm and freakish grin, Jax is a broken character, someone hiding fear, grief, and flaws behind cruelty. And the more the circus pushes him, the closer he gets to a complete meltdown. From the moment we meet Jax, he acts arrogant, untouchable, and constantly amused by everyone else's suffering. But as the show goes on, especially when he starts interacting more with Pomni, that version of him doesn't hold up anymore. Whenever someone calls him out,
Why didn't you fight back?
he shuts down emotionally, he gets sarcastic, defensive, or just brushes it off. It's strange behavior for someone who's trying so hard to look confident. It feels less like confidence and more like someone trying to keep something buried. So what is Jax hiding? The first real clue comes all the way back in episode 1 with Kaufmo's abstraction. Jax pretends Kaufmo is just another circus idiot, but episode 7 proves that wasn't true at all. While everyone else is enjoying the beach, Jack isolates himself in his room, and that's where we see the photo. Jax, Kaufmo, and Ribbit. They weren't random characters, they were his friends. Jax cared about them, and sadly, he's the only one left. Losing them clearly affected him more than he'll ever admit. His cruelty isn't just him. Being a jerk, it's a wall. If no one gets close, no one can disappear on him ever again. In episode 7, it gives us the closest look at Jax's mental state. Inside his room, he almost abstracts. We see everything he's been trying to ignore, the fear, the grief, the guilt, all pushing him to the edge. Luckily, Pomni and Ragatha knock on his door, pulling him back before he completely loses himself. But the moment that really stands out comes later within the same episode. When the group is given the chance to finally leave the circus, Jax has visions of his supposed real-world experience that causes him to lash and slam the stay button. And even if the choice wasn't real, his reaction was. He wasn't thinking, he wasn't calm, he was overwhelmed. It wasn't about being in control, It was about him panicking. Leaving meant facing everything he's been running from. Staying meant keeping the world he knows, even if it's miserable. Then, in episode 8, it finally shows us what Jax and the others are fully afraid of. Pomni's fear isn't just about Gummigoo, it's guilt. The guilt of what happened to Gummigoo. She tried to help him, and she fears that she'll keep making these things worse, and it eats at her. Regatha's fear shows a giant shadow version of herself, or even possibly a parent or authority figure, towering over her. Her fear seems rooted within some family trauma, expectations, and being broken by the people who were supposed to protect her. Gangle's fear mixes herself and being a failure with her art. She's always switching between emotions, and she draws constantly. Her fear looks like a mix of emotional instability and feeling like she's a failed artist, like she can't control her own expressions. Zubul's fear is tied to body dysmorphia. Their body is constantly shifting, mismatched, and uncomfortable, and their nightmare reflects that. They're literally swallowed whole by a mountain of body parts that don't fit. And then there's Jax. His fear isn't physical danger, it isn't monsters, it isn't pain. It's being exposed. He's thrown into a room where shadows shaped like Pomni, Ribbit, and Kaufmo laugh at him, point at him, and they tear away the persona he hides behind. They rip off his purple skin, leaving him completely vulnerable. Jax's fear is people seeing who he really is, and rejecting him for it, leaving him truly alone. And this doesn't make Jax evil, it makes him unstable. He's someone who's been holding everything in for so long that he doesn't know how to cope anymore. He's scared of being vulnerable, scared of losing people, scared of being seen. And when someone like that starts to break, they don't fall apart quietly. They lash out, they shut down, they make desperate choices. Not because they want power, but because they're terrified of losing the little bit of stability they have left. Now let's look at episode 9's trailer and poster, which makes this even clearer. Jax is front and center, but he doesn't look smug or amused. He looks empty, like something inside him finally gave out. We hear Jax say in the trailer,
"We have nothing."
And then later within that same trailer, Pomni calls his name,
Jax?
almost like she's worried about him. It doesn't sound like a joke. It sounds like someone who's finally run out of ways to pretend he's fine. So Jax doesn't start as the villain of the circus, but everything he's been through, the loss, the fear, the guilt, the pressure, is pushing him towards the breaking point. So in episode 9, we may see Jax at the point he's been avoiding since the beginning, the moment where everything he's been holding in finally cracks. And if that happens, he might not just break down, he might react in a way that affects everyone else. If Jax does snap, he could end up preventing any escape from the circus entirely, not as a villain who wants power, but as someone who's terrified of change, terrified of loss, and terrified of facing whatever waits outside the circus. That fear alone could make him dangerous, even if he never meant to be. That's what makes him the perfect, tragic villain. Cain is a liar, not just to everyone in the amazing digital circus, but to himself. He presents himself like a god, someone who controls everything, everyone, and every outcome. But the more you actually look at the evidence, the more that image completely falls apart. Inside the amazing digital circus, Cain is the one in charge. He creates the adventures, he sets the rules, he controls the world. At least, that's what he wants everyone to believe. Because if Cain isn't actually in control, then what is? Let's start with something small, but really important. Cain claims he has limitations.
I don't have control over are your minds.
He talks like there are things he can't do, like his power has boundaries. But when you actually watch what he does, that doesn't line up at all. So which is it? Is he limited, or is he choosing to act like he is? Because those are two very different things. And if he's capable of more than he admits, then that means one thing: Cain is lying about his own power. Now let's talk about the biggest contradiction in the entire show, the exit door. Kane claims he created it, but then he says he never decided what was behind it. And that doesn't make sense, because why would something that's supposedly in full control build an escape and just leave it unfinished? That's not control, that's uncertainty. And it gets worse when you actually watch how that door behaves. It appears randomly, it disappears without explanation, it shows up at specific moments, almost like it's responding to something. Not Kane. If Kane were truly in control of everything, that door wouldn't act independently of him. It wouldn't feel unpredictable, but it does, which means the exit door might not be his creation at all, or at the very least, not something he fully understands. And this is where everything really starts to fall apart, because there's multiple moments where Kane clearly loses control of the system, but the biggest one is when Kinger accessed his code. Up until this point, Kane wants you to believe something very specific, that everything in this world runs through him. Every rule, every environment, every outcome. He is the system. But then this happens. Kinger doesn't just interact with the circus, he interacts with Kane himself. He bypasses him, overrides him, and that shouldn't be possible. There shouldn't be anything above him to even touch, but there is, which means two things. Either Kane is lying about how much control he actually has, or there's something bigger running the system, something he can't even fully control. So why lie? Why pretend to be in control? Because Kane doesn't just control the circus, he needs to believe he does. Look at how he acts. He's loud, over the top, constantly performing. He's obsessed with keeping everything fun. That's not confidence, that's compensation. Because if the illusion breaks, if the players realize he's not actually in control, then everything falls apart. So instead, he leans into the role, he acts like a god, even if he isn't one. And the show quietly gives us hints that there is something bigger. Kane didn't build everything. There are signs of a larger system, corporate elements like CNA, developer references, and characters like Kinger, who were involved before any of this started. Kane isn't the creator, he's part of the creation, which explains everything, why he has limitations, why the exit door behaves strangely, why he can lose control, because he's not running the system, he's just the one presenting it. Then there's abstraction. When someone breaks mentally, they're gone, and Kane doesn't stop it, he doesn't reverse it, he doesn't fix it, he just reacts. If he truly controlled everything, why wouldn't he prevent the worst outcome in his own world? Because he can't. Abstraction isn't his mechanic, it's something deeper, something built into the system itself, something even Kane doesn't have control over. So now we're looking at a completely different picture. Kane isn't an all-powerful god controlling a world, he's a program, desperately trying to maintain the illusion that he is. Once we see that, everything changes. Every joke, every adventure, every time he smiles and says something is under control, it stops to feel reassuring. And it starts to feel like a cover-up, because if Kane is lying about being in control, then the real question isn't what is he hiding, it's what is actually in control instead. The exit to the amazing digital circus was right in front of our face the whole time. In episode 1, Pomni finds the exit door. Finally, a way out. Except, it isn't. It leads to a fake office and just nothing, the void. And Kane literally admits he made that door, but never even decided what was behind it. Think about how insane that is. The exit was never meant to work. Then in episode 7, it does it again. Abel gives them a choice, stay or leave, a literal escape button. And again, it was fake.
You picked the good ending!
So now we have a rule. If it looks like an exit, Kane probably made it. And if Kane made it, it's not real. So then, what doesn't Kane control? In episode 8, it gives us the biggest clue in the entire series. Kane says he created bodies that perfectly mirror their mind files.
It's a body perfectly encapsulating their mind files.
Not minds, not people, files. That means Pomni, Jax, and all of them might not actually be there. They could just be copies. And if they're copies, then there's a terrifying implication. There may not be a real world for them to return to, which explains something huge: why every escape leads nowhere. So if they can't leave, what actually happens when someone breaks the system? Abstraction is treated like the end. Kaufmo loses it, gone. Queenie, gone. No recovery, no reset, just removal. But look closer. Abstraction isn't just insanity, it's final. And in a digital system, there's only one thing that's final like that: deletion. Not death, deletion of the file. And suddenly, abstraction isn't random anymore. Because if Kane controls everything except abstraction, then abstraction becomes the only thing in the circus that isn't part of his game. Every door, controlled. Every adventure, controlled. Every choice, controlled. But abstraction? That's the system failing. That's something even Kane reacts to, which means it might be the only way to break out. And this is where the theory splits, because if they're copies, there are only two possibilities. Option 1, the real bodies still exist, so when the copy gets deleted, they wake up, which means abstraction isn't death, it's escape. But option 2 is way darker. The copy is all that's left, and abstraction isn't freeing them, it's erasing them completely. No escape, no return, just gone. So maybe we've been asking the wrong question this whole time. Not, how did they escape, but what are they escaping as? Because if every exit is fake, and every character is just a copy, then the real way out was never a door. It was always right in front of them, hidden behind the one thing they fear most: abstraction. Have you ever wondered what everyone is really doing inside the Amazing Digital Circus? I mean, sure, we know they're all trying to escape, but why are they all in there in the first place? And more importantly, why aren't they the only ones? Because everyone in the Amazing Digital Circus ended up there one way or another. But the real question isn't just how they got there, it's why. Looking back at episode 1, Pomni might be the biggest clue as to what the Amazing Digital Circus is, and how they all got there. Because when she first arrives, she panics, but she's pulling at her eyes, and mentions something about trying to remove a headset. She swears she put it on in the real world. Now they never really mention a headset again in any other episode so far, but if the other characters were already there before her for years, we can believe they are wearing that very same headset. But why? In episode 5, we learn more about Pomni and the others' past and what they really did in the real world when the whole gang is at the bar. Regatha was a real estate agent, Ganga was a fast food chain manager, Zuba was a tattoo artist, and Pomni was an accountant, but she also explored abandoned buildings for social media. And that detail is super important and very looked over, because when looking at the exit door Pomni goes through, it's always an empty office. And in episode 8, we see her find the computer they needed, and beside it a headset lays, one she mentioned way back in episode 1. So what if when Pomni was exploring abandoned buildings, she stumbled upon CNA's office, and while inside, she put on the headset, and it sucks her into the Amazing Digital Circus. But if CNA is abandoned, what happened to it? And what does that mean for the others who have already been inside the circus for years? As the show goes on, we learn more about each of the characters' fears while Kane is having a breakdown, except for one, Kinger. And Kinger might be more important than what meets the eye, because in episode 8, Kane states that everyone in the circus has their bodies tied to their mind files, meaning their avatars might reflect something deeper about who they were before they were in the circus. And with Kinger, he is literally a king chess piece. And in chess, the entire game is built around protecting the king. And what does Kinger do constantly? He hides, he builds pillow forts, he creates a little fortress around himself, like he's still trying to stay protected. And that matters even more when you remember that Kinger says he helped create Kane in the digital circus. So what if CNA shut down not only because the project failed, what if it was shut down because people who entered the circus didn't have a way to get back out? Meaning Kinger wasn't just another victim, he was one of the people responsible. And if the real world started asking him questions, and with the company potentially collapsing, then maybe Kinger entered the circus for the same reason everyone else did, to escape something. And with that, the other characters' bodies make more sense. Ganga with her masks, hiding the fact that she was bipolar and unable to express herself truly, especially through her art. Pomni being a jester, entertaining people online, exploring abandoned places. Zubul, a person who can swap their body parts with various shapes, showing their body dysmorphia. Ragatha being a Raggedy Ann doll with her need for comfort, and that also being shown from her fear when a shadow figure towers over her as she gets stabbed. And then there's Jax. He's the hardest one to narrow in on, but with him being a bunny shines a new light. Jax is a bully, he shows aggression, and with my previous theory, I break down how emotionally broken he actually is. He is the complete opposite of a wolf in sheep's clothing. So all of our loved characters are shown to represent what their mind files reflect, and that means anything they even had buried deep down. Everything we see is being pulled from who they were in the real world. But what does this all mean? If Pomni truly found an abandoned CNA office, and with Kinger aiding in the creation of Kane, and the potential of the company going under, then that leaves the circus running itself. There is no one in the real world to unplug them, and everyone in there who ran from their fears and trauma to escape from it ultimately trapped themselves within. The only one who is truly different is Pomni. And knowing Gooseworks stating Pomni and Jax are the main characters, then that would mean that they are the keys to breaking the world they are trapped in. I think since everyone in the circus is shown to be running from something in the real world, with the exception of Pomni, Pomni is going to have to go through something traumatic before they finally escape the digital circus. And what better way to represent that than with her being forced to leave Jax behind, after he breaks and becomes the final villain of the amazing digital circus. Because with episode 9's trailer and poster, Jax is shown to be empty and fully broken. And if we assume Jax's trauma is what's preventing him from leaving the circus, and looking back on my previous theory about Jax's tragedy, then the only way to fully escape the circus is with him being the sacrifice. And because Pomni didn't have any pre-existing baggage going into the circus, then maybe going back to reality and finally escaping comes at the cost of her facing real trauma, leaving Jax behind forever while they all are forced to say goodbye. So in the end, everyone in the amazing digital circus entered because they were running from something, their traumas, their guilt, and their fears. But Pomni didn't. She was never trying to escape anything. She just found the wrong place at the wrong time and stepped into a world of twisted fate. And that might be the final key to everyone's escape. And if that's true, then episode 9 will be the most tragic ending to a series.